Good morning, everyone. Can we take our seats, please? Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this board seminar. I hope everyone is comfortable. Hope you had some time to enjoy the snacks outside. We are looking forward to a very exciting panel conversation today. Without further ado, I would like to welcome the chair of this session, the Vice Chair of AKADEMIYA2063's Board of Trustees, Ambassador Etherine Cousin.
To join you here this morning. It is so good to visit Kigali again. And this is an opportunity, the first opportunity for us to host an in-person session since the COVID epidemic began. This is a good signal, Madam Minister, that things are moving in the right direction, that we are all gathered here this morning. With no further ado, please allow me to thank the leaders of AKADEMIYA2063, and of course our own Madam Minister for Agriculture here in Rwanda for her presence with us this morning. I would like to begin by welcoming our leader of AKADEMIYA2063, Dr. Usman Badian, to give us the opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Catherine. Welcome, Madam Minister, Dr. Mukashimana. Welcome to the guests who are joining us here, Madam Mutesi. Good having you here. It is a pleasure to welcome you and to join us this seminar that we are organizing in connection with our fourth board meeting. I wouldn't be long because we're a little bit late. I just want to say welcome to all of you, and I look forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Usman, for those remarks. Madam Minister, the Honorable Dr. Geraldine Mushkamana, I always do this, which is why I call her Minister Geraldine, because out of respect for her, I do not want to mispronounce her, given her last name. But Madam Minister Geraldine has been a friend to AKADEMIYA2063 since the initiation of this organization. I don't believe there has been a trustee meeting where you have not presented in support of the government of Rwanda for the work of this first of its kind institution located here in Kigali. So with that, Madam Minister, I would like to turn to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to see us in the room. It's been a while that we have been working on online, and that has made us resilient, actually. Because I mean, whenever I'm called to go to an in-person meeting, I'm like, that's involved for a lot of traveling and so on. So, but it's really a pleasure to see so many of you coming here, and thank you for coming. And to our friends from AKADEMIYA63, it's a pleasure that at least now we are able to have this board meeting in Kigali. So again, I'm so happy to be joining forces with AKADEMIYA63 and all of you stakeholders to be having this dialogue and to discuss actions around issues of strategic importance for the development of our continent. So today we are going to be discussing the regional trade outlook in Eastern Africa. I see colleagues from the Ministry of Trade and the other colleagues who are working in that. And this is an opportunity for us as Rwanda, because it does resonate with the mandate of our ministry to promote sustainable development of a modern and efficient and competitive agriculture and livestock sectors in Rwanda. So as we are in charge of ensuring food security, increasing export of agricultural products, and the diversification for the benefits of farmers' community and of our economy. So the strategic policy interventions are very critical, especially at these times. And this is why we must consistently rely on evidence, on data, and apply the research to generate sustainable solutions. This is a priority for Rwanda. I guess that the AKADEMIYA2063 colleagues know that. We worked hard for them to come and be hosted in Rwanda, so again, we keep really consistently wishing that they get a pleasant stay in Rwanda. So actually 2 weeks ago, in the third comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, carried up by your annual review report, on which Usman was present, Rwanda such an expectation and the homework that we have been given by heads of states. So I hope that this seminar is going to be taking stock of what has been accomplished so far through our regional economic communities, through project programs and policy interventions that have yielded the results and can be adapted to our local context. Also to anticipate possible challenges for better preparedness and to delve into the boundless opportunities for economic integration, growth, and prosperities, especially through the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So, Madam Ambassador, I don't want to take so much time. I once again want to thank everyone who is attending this seminar. It's really my pleasure to see all of you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Minister Geraldine, for those very important opening remarks and for acknowledging not only the importance of the presence of AKADEMIYA2063 here in Kigali and to allow me on behalf of the organization to again thank you and the government of Rwanda for hosting this organization, but also in your remarks for acknowledging the importance of trade to the Rwandan economy and the importance of this discussion this morning in moving forward the trade agenda. And with that, please allow me to introduce and welcome our leader and the executive chairperson of AKADEMIYA2063, Dr. Usman Bodian, for his keynote address on the seminar topic. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Cousin. Let me first also say thank you to DG Antoine Kajangwe for being here today with us, and Director Mutabazi, CEO Bizimana, and Dr. Pierre Lutaisire from University of Rwanda, and of course Ms. Mutesi here on the podium with us. So with that, let me start my presentation on the opportunities for trade outlook in East Africa and opportunities for Rwanda. There are 5 points on the agenda. I'll be going a bit quick. We can share the PowerPoint later in the report. So I'll talk about the regional trade patterns and performance across the COMESA countries and look at country specialization and what the potential is for expanding trade. Then look at the competitiveness trends among the regional countries, before I turn to a long-term outlook of trade among these countries, and then finish with the opportunities of Rwanda. So just the approach for this work, we went sequentially using a regional market model that looks at how economies are performing right now and what kinds of policy options would be available to perform trade. And that gives us leading value chain that between now and 2030 will be the one that will be driving regional trade in West Africa, Eastern Africa. Then we took those driving trends of those value chains into each country and look at what it means if they were to exploit that potential of driving trade, what it would do in terms of employment creation and income growth in that country. Then we take that out, we go now to the household level. If income grows that much and employment grows that much, what does it do for equality, for poverty, and food security at the household level? That last allow you then, if you have 10 value chains that are driving, you can select the one that has the biggest contribution in those different levels. So first now to the patterns of trade. What's interesting here, if you look at, this is Rwanda. Rwanda's exports, there are some that are really just going to the regional markets. If you look at those in circle, rice, wheat, and animal and vegetable fats and oils are among the leading next to tea and palm oil. And you can see that those exports to the region exactly the same amount as they export to the world. So that means really it's the regional exports that you're seeing that are reflected because the world includes East Africa as well. So outside of tea, and coffee, most Rwandese exports, at least the leading ones, go to the region as you would expect, and that's the case. In terms of imports, you'll see here again maize, bread, pastry, and biscuits, and animal or vegetable oils are also the leading imports from the region. What's interesting is that rice is imported only from outside, is not, or at least leads in terms of imports from outside. And if you look at the next table, you see that there are commodities that are being imported by Rwanda and that are being exported into the region. That's the case of rice, wheat, or palm oil. And this is actually something you see in a lot of countries in Africa. When we're looking at the wheat figures right now, recently, because of the Ukraine crisis, we figured out actually 23 African countries are importing more wheat that they need for their consumption. And they're exporting those to other countries. So when we look at the crisis, it's not just those who are exposed to global markets who will suffer, but those who are getting the imports from their neighbors. Rwanda imports $37 million worth, but it re-exports 15, half of it almost into the region. So if Rwanda were to import less wheat, it will have enough. But then those who are dependent on Rwanda as their export wouldn't have. So it's going to be much more complicated than just being exposed. Here are Rwanda's main trading partners. I hope it's clear enough for you. It's kind of small. So 98% of Rwanda's exports into the region go to Burundi, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, and DRC. So those are the main partners here. We looked at performance on regional markets. Those who have countries that have been able to increase the export share and also grow the export faster. So where you want to be is really on the northwest quadrant, because then you're raising your export share and you're growing your export. That means that you're growing faster than the others to be able to raise your share. You can still grow, but not faster than the others. You can also raise your export share, but to do that, you have to grow faster than the others. So those in Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and Madagascar are those who are driving regional trade in the region. Same in terms of commodities for which they're raising shares in import and raising shares in export. That means they're being traded the most, demanded the most, and sold the most. And those are coffee, tobacco, maize, other vegetable oils, and cotton. Those are the ones driving, for now, trade in the region. So on specialization, I'll be a little bit quick on this one. I don't think we need to make this argument anymore, but it's still out there that African countries may not be able to trade much because they're similarly specialized. They produce the same thing, they see the same sun, they have the same water, and I don't get tired of making this argument, which I started doing since I was doing my PhD, and that's a long time ago, that what drives trade is just not natural conditions, but the opportunities to trade are driven by a lot of other things. And countries may choose to trade because maybe they've invested by chance in a specific technology and ahead of others. But also they can be exporting things that the people don't want to eat, but they can produce. Nigeria is the best producer of cassava in the world, but they don't export a pound. Thailand exports quite a bit because they don't eat cassava. But in Nigeria, what they produce, they eat. So there are a lot of things. So here what we're looking at is, are the production patterns really that similar to prevent trade to take place? Then to just make this quick, we have an indicator of similarity of production patterns. And we compare for every product, we compare all countries to see what their production patterns are. So you have close to 1,200 pairs of comparison here. And we look at the distribution. So how many of those indicators, pair-wise comparison, fall between each range of indicator value? 0 to 20%, 20 to 40, 40 to 6%. By convention, indicators less than 6% are indicative of a scope for expanded trade. They're dissimilar enough. And you look at up to the green bars, everything from green downwards is less than 6%, comparing all the 1,200 indicators across the region. That means that production patterns are dissimilar enough to allow people to trade more with one another. They're not producing all the same thing, okay? Then we looked at the export patterns. You may still be similar in production, but you decide to export differently. Again here, most indicators, anything that is from the blue to the green, meaning almost everybody here, they are dissimilar enough. They've chosen to sell or buy different things, even if they were neighbors and similar, but they're buying and selling different things, therefore they can trade with one another. The last one is looking how much do trade flows overlap? How much is Rwanda selling the things that the neighbors are buying, but to different parties, not to one another, which gives you an indicator of what can be redirected, right? If I'm selling to a third party, my neighbor's buying from a third party, when we can do trade together. And again, you have up to 30% of overlapping trade flows between countries. In the case of Rwanda, it has gone from about 5% to now 30% overlapping trade between her and its neighbors. So now the competitiveness of these countries. We looked at which countries are performing better in global markets in general, because the world is one market. You cannot do well in East Africa, you're not doing well globally, because those who are competing with you globally will chase you down into the region. So, and we just looked at the change in competitiveness from the early 2000s to recently. And you see the countries that have increased competitiveness on the top. Rwanda is right at the middle there, almost no major change since over the last 15 years or so. We looked at the commodities as well. Those that are gaining market share globally, and here raw hide and skins, everything on the top. Dairy produce from the milling industry, preparation of cereals, flour, starch, and milk, preparation of vegetable fruits. You see that everything on the top says preparation, preparation. And this is an amazing trend happening in Africa right now. Even regionally, African countries are now exporting more processed agricultural goods than before. The largest share of traded goods in Africa now are processed goods, not the raw materials. We have complained for decades about exporting raw materials. It's changing heavily. Those that are losing are the raw materials and the like. So here we looked at Rwanda's leading commodities, where Rwanda has really been very competitive globally. Any value here closer to 1 means that you're highly competitive in that commodity. And they're all in the 0.96 to 1. So these are really commodities in which Rwanda is very, very competitive globally, right? And the biggest here are coffee, tea, meat, and spices. Then you have gums, raisins, and other vegetables. And you have here raw hide, skins, and leather. But all others are commodities where Rwanda is extremely competitive globally. So we measured competitiveness as well in terms of the unit value of exports. Is Rwanda beating others in terms of its cost? So anything that's higher than 1, for example, in the case of nuts, if you look at Kenya, the price is almost 20 times the price of nuts from Kenya being exported. So Rwanda can make money much easier than Kenya there. So in the numbers here around tells you that for these commodities, nuts, potatoes, other roots and tubers, pulses, and vegetables, there is not much in the region for Rwanda, at least in terms of exporting, and probably globally as well. Okay. So now let's look at the long-term outlook. First, the recent trends, because that drives now how we look long-term. We just assume that what happened over the last 10, 15 years will continue in the future. And you look at the trends in East Africa, you have 3 commodities for which trade has been going up: vegetable oils, nuts, and meats. And you heard me saying how competitive Rwanda can be in nuts, but also you'll see in vegetable oils and meats. But everything else has been trending downwards. So there's been a real pressure on trade, and the reasons are not necessarily lack of supplies or lack of competitiveness. We'll see that later. They may be due to other things. This is one of the reasons. Because of high economic growth, demand in the countries, consumption has been growing much faster than production. So the net surplus you have to export has been getting less and less. People are consuming more and demanding more because of faster growth. Here are the trends. The red lines are the demand, historical in solid and in dotted lines, what we project by 2030. And the black lines are the production, which was already growing slower than consumption, and that's going to be probably continuing into the future. The other dynamics interesting in COMESA, traditional powerhouses like Egypt have been losing market share rapidly over the years, and we expect this to continue for the rest of the decades. Malawi as well has been slowing down, that's a yellow. And then there are new players emerging like Tanzania, but they're emerging slower than the others are losing speed. So that all of this is going to be pushing down regional trades, slower growing production than demand. A substitution of those who are driving regional trade leads to a trend, what you see in the blue line, of falling trade in general. But there are interesting dynamics in there. If you look at the blue, deep blue in the bottom, this is cereals, which are losing steam. But then you look at other crops, the light blue, expanding rapidly, and especially meat on the top are expanding also rapidly. And other food crops are about the same. So other food crops, other crops and meats are displacing cereals as the largest traded commodity in the region. Now, we looked at how could you shift a trend like this, because you see that you look at the line, it's going down and start reversing toward the third year, toward the 2030. How could you expand that? We experimented with very simple policy options that any government can do. The first one is invest in raising yields to boost productivity. We're assuming 10% increase in yields, just in our simulations. Or you reform trade policies and invest in infrastructure to reduce overall trading costs. We assume you do whatever you do to reduce trading costs by 10%. Could be regulatory changes, administrative changes, could be a lot of other things, licensing and so on. And the third, we say remove all cross-border trading barriers. And Rwanda know how that would important be and how it would affect its trade. So we looked at the first here. If countries were to raise each one of them, just invest in raising yields by 10%, it will add another $600 million, more than $500 million cumulative over the next 10 years. Okay? So if they were to remove all trade barriers, it's about half of that, $300 million additional in trade, because they will make trade much faster. If they were to reduce overall trading costs, they can add another 300 as well. So the easier part, just trading costs and removing trade barriers, which are policy and regulatory, could give you as much as investing in raising yields by 10%. And we know that's expensive to raise yield, the new technology, the extension, the adoption, what have you. So there are opportunities here to do that. So, and for cereals, you see the same thing, up to 2030. So the big players here are going to be Tanzania, as I said, and Ethiopia toward the end. But this is the substitution we've seen happening in the country. Let me skip that one, it's the same thing. Here are meats, again, the same story. The interesting side, a story about meat is that if you were to raise yields in agriculture by 10%, you'll make agricultural farming more attractive, but also you're going to lower the cost of feeds where people produce more animal and meats at home and therefore import less from one another. So improving yields will reduce meats in trade, but if you were to reduce trading costs or to remove cross-border barriers, you'll boost meat trade as well. All right. Now let's look at the opportunity for Rwanda. Here are the winning commodities by 2030 in what we look with all the different scenarios. I just highlighted here for Rwanda because the text is very small. Groundnut oil, spices, coffee, hides and skins, and tea are the 5 commodities that will be driving Rwanda's trade in the region over the next 10 years. And here we'll look at how it's going to go. There's been falling trends, but you see how groundnut oil in the light blue on the top, which just started, is going to be a major income earner in the region if it continues to grow. You see tea, which is losing steam here. And you see coffee, which goes up and then started also losing steam. But in general, groundnut oil and hides and skins and spices will continue the expansion. If Rwanda were to succeed in getting cross-border trade barriers removed, it will make an additional $2 million in exports, just by those simple measures. And if it were to reduce trading costs, it will improve a little bit, but boosting yields will also give you quite a lot in terms of increasing your revenues. This is above what you will have if you didn't do anything, right? Not just what's happening right now. And here, the different commodities you have here that I talked about here, they're not all groundnut oil, spices, coffee, hides and skins, and tea are not affecting growth, poverty, and employment the same way, because they're produced differently, they're produced in different areas by different people. So what we've done next is to prioritize, not just for Rwanda, but for every country. The first one is to say which commodities have the highest increase in regional export under all 3 scenarios I talked about, reducing overall trade costs, removing barriers, and increasing yields, both in terms of absolute value and percentage. You see here that from the ranking we got, groundnut oil, spices, coffee, tea, and skin, in that order, are the leaders in Rwanda. If you look at them in the region, they rank 13 and 16 among 50 countries. I'm sorry, 50 commodities almost, but every commodity can rank several times for several countries. That means that these are really leading commodities for the future. And those are the top in case of Rwanda. They rank 13 in the region, but first in Rwanda. So is coffee and tea and skins. Currently, they're being exported. Groundnut oil is barely being exported in 2019, but it could go to almost $500 million by 2030 if they were to pursue that value chain. Here, spices are now being produced at 25. They may be less if there are no changes, but I show the changes you can do, yields and trade costs and removing barriers, coffee and tea and skins. So which one of those do you drive hard in Rwanda if you cannot drive all of them? So we do it for every country. Here we're showing the results for Rwanda. We say, how do they contribute to major goals that the country has? Improving performance in regional markets, trying to substitute for imports if you can, the potential for value addition, but also especially food security and resilience. So the production changes, the households expenditure, standard poverty, urban poverty, rural standard poverty, extreme poverty, all these different poverty scales, and participation of women of youth. We're looking at 15 indicators here. And we target every value chain, saying if it were to grow, how will it affect each one of those? And then you make your choice based on their contribution to all these different indicators. Sorry, Madam Minister, it's very tiny. We couldn't have a bigger screen here, but we'll share the PowerPoint. So in order to rank across 15 indicators, you know, it's complicated. So what we did, we came up with 2 scores, what we call the effectiveness scores, meaning how many of those 15 indicators would increase in a given value chain advance. Would groundnut oil, spices, tea, coffee, and skins, if you were to increase by 10% exports in that sector, how many of those 15 indicators will it advance? That's the effectiveness. If one advances only 2 and not the other one 10, probably the one that advances 10 is better for you. Then we say you can advance 10, but you don't advance them really hard enough, maybe just at the bottom, not much. So then we have the efficiency score, which means that are you moving an indicator above the average of all other? And if you're moving the indicator above the average, you're more efficient than the other. So we're combining the two, how effective you are in advancing the 15 criteria and how efficient you are. And if you're both effective and efficient, you're probably a winner. And so that's what you see here. Spices, hides and skins, and groundnut oil are much more effective and efficient at the same time in terms of what regional trade can do in advancing those 50 indicators, from growth, from employment, from food security, and so on and so forth. Right? So and here's how they rank in terms of effectiveness. Spices would affect 67, almost 70% of those 15 indicators would benefit from increase in trade in spice, and about 70 will be affected by more than average, followed by heads and skins and groundnut oil. Tea and coffee are effective but less efficient because they affect almost everything, but not very high as the others would do. And this may have to do with the fact that production is concentrated in specific areas and not spread around the country. Okay? But as you will see, they are big income earners and therefore still very important. They may not drive all those 15 indicators, but they bring a lot of money for the country. And that's what you can see here now. Which policies then will move which value chain? Because different policy options affect different value chains differently. So you can see here that groundnut oil and skins will benefit a lot from removing trade border barriers, cross-border barriers. So I will negotiate with my neighbors just to remove those barriers. That will do a lot in boosting, of course, if you produce and want to sell, in boosting groundnut oil and boosting skins trade. For spices, it is reducing trading costs, but also increasing crop yield. So there's technology and that's environment for trade in general that will move that, right? So you'll see that just doing that from groundnut oil and skins, you can go in total of $500 million additional in income from trading in the region by 2030. However, as I was saying, if you were to remove cross-border trade barriers, coffee and tea will benefit hugely, and they will also continue to be major income owners for the country. So they are very important. The others are more products for diversification with a bigger impact on growth. So my final remarks, there are real opportunities for Rwanda to compete in regional markets outside of tea and coffee and cereals. Two of the simulated policy changes are very modest. Reduction of trading costs. These are policy, regulatory, non-tariff barriers. Often, maybe you might want to negotiate with your neighbors, but you certainly can do that even yourself internally. Removing cross-border barriers requires you negotiating with your neighbors, but those are easy and implementable and low cost and quick payoff measures. The third, increasing yields is a little bit tougher, takes more time, costs more money, but it's also feasible. We have simulated very modest changes. 10% increase in yield is not that huge. So pursuit, however, of a more ambitious agenda, infrastructure, science and technology investment will generate much larger gains and be much more impactful than what I've shown here. So the opportunity is there, and the different policy options that are available for Rwanda are there as well. So I thank you all for your patience. Thank you.
Dr. Badian, thank you very much for those very, very enlightening remarks. Let me now ask for courtesy from the audience for me to extend protocol and welcome those that I did not at the opening of my remarks. We have heard from Minister Geraldine, of course, and Dr. Usman Badian. We will next hear from Ms. Patience Mutesi, the Country Director of Trademark for East Africa, Rwanda. Thank you very much for being here. But also in our audience today, we have Dr. Pierre Claver Rutayesere, Principal of the College of Business and Economics of the University of Rwanda. Dr. Claude Bizmiani, CEO of the Natural Agricultural Export Development Board. Mr. Joseph Mutabazi, and I apologize for my American accent on my attempts to pronounce names, who is the Director of Trade and Business Development for the Rwanda Private Sector Federation. Mr. Antoine Marie Kajangwe, the Director General of Trade and Investment at the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for allowing me that courtesy to ensure that our guests know how welcome they are here in this event today. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Patience Mutesi for her keynote remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kazan, Honorable Dr. Mukeshimana, Dr. Badiane, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm actually going to be discussing the presentation, but I'd like to start off by introducing the organization that I represent. My name is Patience Mutesi. I'm the country director of Trademark East Africa. Trademark East Africa is an aid for trade organization. So I like to say that we are implementers in the sense that we identify barriers to trade, working with the government agencies, working with the EAC Secretariat in Arusha, to identify barriers to trade and then work towards resolving them. So we rely a lot on the kind of information that comes from academia and the likes, so that we're able to really package solutions or projects that are going to address barriers to trade. And then we also work with the private sector to increase their competitiveness. And our goal and aim is really to contribute towards increasing trade. So thank you very much to the AKADEMIYA2063 team and the board for inviting us to participate in this conversation. I'm going to really keep my remarks very short and look at the more practical sides around how do we actually take advantage of, the trade outlook. The trade outlook has been shown to be very positive. There's obviously opportunities for Rwanda to take advantage of beyond the traditional exports of tea, coffee, and minerals, and think about, edible oils, wheat, rice, and all that. So I will just start by giving a bit of a background. When you look at Rwanda and the kind of market that it presents, Rwanda is a market of 12 million people, a GDP of about $10 billion. And trade is estimated at about, for 2020, we're at about $3.5 billion of trade in Rwanda. And then you go a step higher. Most of our trade is with EAC, as Dr. Badiane presented. Most of our trade is with EAC. EAC currently has 6 countries. In fact, it's really interesting that this conversation is happening at a time when DRC is joining the EAC. So EAC is a market of about 187 million people. DRC is coming on board with over 90 million additional, so we're talking about 270 plus million people for EAC. We're looking at also a GDP, currently GDP for EAC is about $200 billion. DRC is coming on board with an additional $50 billion, so we're looking at an EAC of $250 billion of GDP. But then there is also the trade aspect. Trade within EAC in 2020 was at about $51 million. So when you think about a region that has a GDP of 200 billion, only trading at $51 million, there's huge opportunities. And because all the countries within EAC are agricultural based, there's very little industrial contribution, very little contribution to GDP from the services sector. There's a lot of opportunities that come with the agricultural sector. So it's really interesting that the conversation today is around agriculture and how the region can take advantage of that. And then from the region, we go to the opportunities that the African Continental Free Trade Area presents. The continent of Africa presents a market of about 1.3 billion people and a GDP of, sorry about that pause. I kind of mix up sometimes trade and population. 1.3 billion people, trade of $3.4 trillion. So as we can see, as the markets expand, the opportunities are there, and the opportunities are available for the people, for the businesses, the farmers, and everyone that's is involved in contributing towards GDP growth. So some of the points that I wanted to discuss is around the opportunity to boost agricultural produce within the regional integration framework. When you look at the DRC that is currently joining EAC, DRC today imports about spends about $1.5 billion on food imports. And most of that is food that's coming outside the continent. There's a huge opportunity that lies with just DRC entering the EAC framework. So how do we take advantage of that? And I really liked that Dr. Badiani was talking about, removing trade barriers, facilitating trade. So I want to speak also a little bit around those opportunities. And then the opportunities to boost economic diversification and industrialization in Rwanda and the region. There's the agricultural part, but there's also the non-agricultural part around the region coming together. And beyond agricultural produce, if you look at DRC, there's a lot of minerals, there's a lot of raw materials that can then contribute towards the region in implementing the regional industrial plan that they've put together. Industrialization in the region has been very, very slow. How can we now put agriculture into the picture and add value to what our key exports are? So we talked about edible oils, but when you look at actual production of edible oils, I believe, I stand to be corrected on this, but I believe a lot of it is coming in semi-processed from outside the continent, and maybe some value add or just trade happening in the region. What is it that we can do to increase actual value addition around edible oils? Number two, coffee, tea, rice that is coming in. I like that, rice production within the region is increasing, be it rice from Tanzania, rice from Rwanda going towards DRC and the neighboring countries. Can we add value and look at markets outside of the region? There's maize. Maize production in the region remains high, but it's traded in a raw form. How can we add value to that and reach markets outside of Africa? And then there is the opportunities to trade in services, for services that can be linked towards agricultural production. The Ministry of Agriculture has been really behind RICA as an organization, so building skills around agricultural produce. There's a lot more that needs to be done around developing trade in other services, such as trade in financial services, increasing logistics within the region related to production of agricultural produce. So that's something that we need to look at. The other one is around the importance for trade facilitation for us to actually increase trade in agricultural produce. In as much as we're talking about increasing production of these trades, of these agricultural produce, the real issue beyond post-harvest losses is how do we help the farmers to actually reach their markets? So looking at development of feeder roads, developing road networks and other infrastructure that is going to help farmers access markets beyond their immediate horizon. But also looking at a combination of hard infrastructure, development of the roads, and all other hard infrastructure with trade facilitation measures, such as how do we remove bureaucracy when it comes to border crossing? How do we improve the capacity of the border officials so that they understand that there is value in increasing trade and moving trade fast? I was just reading a report the other day around trade in SADC, and they were talking about how long it takes trucks to get into South Africa. And this is just between two countries who are within the same regional blocks. And they were saying in that waiting time, they actually have, I forget which border it was, but they were talking about in the past year or so, having 4 drivers dying while waiting to cross a border, just because the border officials are expecting a bribe. So on the softer components, how do we change the mindset of the border officials to understand that there is value in getting these goods moving across borders much faster? So trade facilitation is huge, is a huge necessity. There's an opportunity for Rwanda to position herself as a regional logistics hub. And I know that the government of Rwanda has an ambition to position herself as such. But how do we take advantage of Rwanda's position in the middle of east and west of Africa and take advantage of value addition opportunities that present themselves with that positioning around attracting investments that are geared towards value addition to take advantage of the raw materials that we have in the region, but also take advantage of that logistics opportunity that presents itself for Rwanda. And then there are a number of things that I wanted to talk about that need to happen. I've touched upon what needs to happen for us to actually for Rwanda to take advantage of this position and the opportunities that are presented under the African Continental Free Trade Area and agricultural produce. Number one is the availability of data and market information is really, really important to orient the private sector in their decisions. I like that in the panel that's coming up, the Private Sector Federation will be represented. I think one of the real challenges with the private sector is there's a lack of data. And I like that this is one of the gaps that academia is coming to fill. When you talk to an average private sector player, the question will be, where are the opportunities? And there's no one-stop shop for this data to be found. So there's really a need for us to develop data for the private sector to take advantage of, but also on the government side, for the government to develop policies that are going to be backed by this data. So evidence-based policy making is really important so that the region will take advantage of these opportunities that lie there. And then the other thing is around capacity building. I think there is need for state actors to prioritize capacity building, both for the private sector, but like I said, also on the government side. One, to take advantage of the opportunities of the African Continental Free Trade Area, but also to improve the skills of negotiating that will help Rwanda to take full advantage of the protocols and instruments of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And then I also talked about promotion of trade facilitation, developing both soft and hard infrastructure, enhancing the productivity and competitiveness of the private sector, and also improving logistical capacities and finding ways to reduce transport costs. Transport costs within the region and Africa in general has been proven to be one of the major challenges around enhancing trade. So what do we need to do? We need to critically think about what needs to happen to reduce transport costs within the region if we are to fully take advantage of regional integration. And then finally, on the private sector side, making sure that there is support provided for the private sector to enhance productive capacities. If we're going to take advantage of the benefits of the African Continental Free Trade Area, it's really important that we have a private sector that is ready to take advantage of those opportunities. So there is no value in having a market of 1.3 billion people if the businesses cannot take advantage of that. So it's really, really important that we invest in strengthening the capacities, investing in e-commerce solutions, investing in access to financing. I think the SMEs require access to financing to be able to scale their businesses. So that's something that we also need to look at. So thank you very much. There were so many things in there, but I hope that they can start a conversation with the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mutesi. Those remarks gave us much to think about and to strengthen and hopefully enlighten the conversation and catalyze the discussion on the next panel. Before we move to the next panel, I would also like to welcome two more guests that I've been informed are present with us here today. The One UN coordinator, are you here? There, welcome. And of course, the DG of the National Institute of Statistics. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here with us today. And with that, I will use the African phrase, all protocols now being officially observed. Thank this opening panel and welcome to the stage the Mr. Arno Quizera, who will lead the next discussion.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Ambassador Kazin. Quite the remarks there. And my name is Arnold Quizita. I'm going to take you through a quick session, panel session. But some key takeaways. Mrs. Patience Mutesi talked about 1.3 billion people. We are here as AKADEMIYA2063, so a lot of numbers being thrown around, right? 52% intra-Africa region trade is the target by the African Union by 2063, 52%. Now, I'm going to take you a few steps back, and those steps are Africa trades the least with itself among all continents in the world at this particular moment. We trade within ourselves as an intra-regional trade, standing at less than 12%. The East African Community Region, SADC, ECOWAS, intra-regional trade in those bodies is still less than 20%. And that says there's a lot of room and a lot of things that we need to do. So, magic numbers, 2063, improving intra-regional trade to more than 50% by 2063, 1.3 billion people. How are we going to tackle that? Agriculture is still the backbone of many of our economies on the continent, and our conversation today is largely going to be around how we use the agriculture spring to uplift our continent. Allow me, without any further ado, to invite our panelists, starting with Anthony Kenyangwe. He is the Director General of Trade and Investment at the Ministry of Trade and Industry of Rwanda. Dr. Pierre Clever Rutaisire, he's the Principal of the College of Business and Economics at the University of Rwanda. Thank you. Mr. Joseph Mutabazi, the Director of Trade and Business Development at the Rwanda Private Sector Federation, also known as PSF. Thank you. And Mr. Claude Bizimana, who is the CEO of the National Agriculture Export Board. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for making the time this morning, and thank you for joining us. Interesting numbers. Tony and I have had a few discussions regarding this conversation in the past, but I want us to go back to 2018 when the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was signed. Tony was in a different role then. I remember him running around the room to ensure that the presidents actually sign those contracts or make those commitments. It wasn't easy, and I think that's the reason as to why bodies like AKADEMIYA2063, who are going to give us data-driven innovations, are important for our leaders. So signing of those agreements themselves was a hard task. We had the president, Mr. Paul Kagame, having to, in a way, twist leaders to staying in the room in order to sign those agreements. So fast forward 2021, it came into operation January 1st. It came at a time when we're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the fruits from the first year are yet to be seen of the operationalization of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So I want us to start there, Tony, of why AFCFTA is not only important in improving regional trade, but also can help uplift economies on the continent. Why is AFCFTA important?
Thank you very much, Arnold, and good morning, everyone. As Arnold has said, my name is Antoine Kajangwe, but I go by Tony, so please feel free to, the name is very long and very complicated. But let me first maybe start off by appreciating the invitation from AKADEMIYA2063 to the ministry to participate in this panel. Very exciting to be here and to have followed the presentation by Dr. Biaden. Just maybe a quick reflection on it, because I thought there were some really important points that came from it that are also very much in line with the ministry's policies moving forward, and specifically the AFCFTA strategy. When we're talking about value chain, regional value chain development, This is a critical aspect of our strategy moving forward. And agro-processed products is central to that. So being able to have research-driven, data-driven analysis that can pinpoint which of those agricultural products we can facilitate, support, and prioritize as a government, I think informs and enriches our policy decision-making. So I would say it very much aligns already with those that have been identified under our Afcfta strategy. Of course, that being edible oils, as Patience has touched on, nuts, and hides and skins. There's been a lot of interventions in the past on these key areas, and it's good to see that there is huge potential, even from independent research that's being done, such as that from academia. Another important reflection that I found in the presentation is the similarity of exports within the region. The World Bank Regional Economic Update report of February also touched on this point of saying within the EAC we're producing the same, exporting the same, and so we have to find our niche as a country within the export sector. And so what is that going to be? And I think agricultural commodities, specifically as those highlighted by this study, are central to that, but also manufactured value-added products beyond beyond these specific cereals and commodities. And then there's a point that Patience touched on that I think is going to be critical moving forward, especially in the context of the Afcfta, and that is trade logistics and Rwanda as a hub for regional trade. How do we develop that, and what infrastructure do we put in place, both hard and soft, to facilitate that type of services exchange? It's a distribution service, and so how do we implement the right policies to drive commodities exchange, commodities trading within the region? We found that we have that competitive advantage. We're centrally located, centrally linked to markets across the region. How do we build off of our geographic location to really drive this just development? And I think the Afcfta is going to be central to this. And maybe as a transition then to responding to your question, why is the Afcfta important? The World Bank also, I believe it was 2020, really at the outset of the start of trading of the Afcfta, highlighted a number of critical areas where the Afcfta is going to benefit. And they titled their study, the distribution, the economic and distributional benefits of the Afcfta. And it's a really long study, but very important in highlighting some of the potential. But it touches on the income gains that will be accrued by member states and specifically citizens. Talk about $430 billion in income gains increased across the region. Specifically for Rwanda, I think it was something like 47 million or 50 million around there. But more research such as this, I think, is going to help distill exactly what are the specific benefits. Talked about the increase in wages that are going to be gained by citizens. And one of the important elements is that women are actually anticipated to gain more from the Afcfta than men in terms of wage increases. So this is really exciting for what the Afcfta has to offer. Of course, intra-Africa trade, in terms of how this is going to increase across the region, improving from the current 18% intra-Africa trade to over 50%. Now, some economists, and I think for those of you who know Andrew Mould from UNECA, will always say, we're already doing very well in terms of intra-regional trade, right? Because informal cross-border trade is often not recorded and is often not published as an element of intra-regional trade, but contributes considerably a lot for trading amongst the region. So I think that is something that's going to continue to increase. We're going to see more intra-regional trade. It's, I would say, appalling to hear that within the EAC itself, as a market of 250 million people, or 250 billion US dollars GDP, we're only trading $50 million. And so there's need really to push more intra-regional trade, ensuring that we can add value locally export within the region, buy and trade amongst each other. And I think that is what the AFCFTA has to offer, in addition to many more. And we'll be happy to touch on this later. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Tony has set the ball rolling. I just want to bring Mr. Claude Bizimana into the conversation. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Claude Bizimana is the CEO of the National Agriculture Export and Development Board, commonly known as NAEB. Now, Malabo, there was, a conversation by COMESA, and from that conversation, things were noticed. Trade, intra-regional trade within the COMESA region between 2013 and 2018, 5-year period, I believe, grew at about 7.3%. Now, that was intra-regional, while extra-regional trade by COMESA member states only grew at about slightly above 5%, right? So this seems to be a predominance and something AFCFTA can tap into of intra-regional trade over extra-regional trade. And it's reflected by a few of the things Tony has talked about: informal agriculture trade going across borders, something that can be, can be stopped in a way. So I want to know your thoughts for that particular sector, as COMESA, as ESC, how this could potentially be used as a stepping stone for AFCFTA.
Well, thank you very much, and pleased to be here with you today. I'm Claude Bizimana, as the moderator said. I represent one of the two agencies under the Ministry of Agriculture and More Resources, which is called National Agriculture Export Development Board. We are mainly mandated to advise the government in terms of policy development, strategy development around exports of agriculture and livestock commodities, but also be able to meet international market requirements. So we come in terms of support the policy level, but also logistical and infrastructure level. So before I respond to that, I just want to make a quick comment on Dr. Bajan's presentations around trade, cross-border trades, where it was shown that Rwanda is trading at 98% with 4 of the 5 ESC member states, in addition to DRC. It's very interesting because DRC alone would take around 80%, which means that the remaining 18% is with other 4 countries in ESC. What is more interesting to look at now when DRC joins ESC is how those dynamics will change, because Rwanda was basically taking advantage of the agreement within the region and re-export some of those commodities to DRC. And now it will be much more, to look at how these numbers will change if DRC has access to ESC market, because that will be very important to look at. And that what brings also the discussions around comparative advantage. What can we do that we can take advantage of that particular market when DRC is within the same context? So I really wanted to emphasize that before talking about intra versus extra regional trade. Normally regs, in the case of COMESA, aim at removing trade barriers. This was mentioned, but also establish closer commercial, monetary, financial, as well as economic coordination and cooperation among member states. So by doing so, regional economic groupings aim to accelerate economic growth and development of participating countries. This is the case for COMESA, and this is the case for also ESC and other regional economic communities. So intra-regional integration will help countries overcome divisions. That's very key. That was also mentioned earlier. Those divisions that impede the flow of goods, services, capital, people, but also ideas. That's very important, because this shows the integration about, not only goods and services, but also capital, people, and ideas. So these divisions are a constraint to economic growth, especially in our regions. I'm going to use an evidence from the International Food Policy Institute by Bowen, Ojo, and Zaki. called Africa Agriculture Trade Monitor 2020. According to these three authors, we have already indications of how intra-African trade, intra-regional African trade took over regional trade, and these are, but not limited to, these cultural similarities among countries in respective regional blocks. We have long historical trade relationship between member countries. We also have limited enforcement of regulations. This is very key, because if we go extra regions, that's most of the time that we face this kind of enforcement of regulations, especially trading with Europe or North America. So in that, African countries within the same regional economic communities will really not be able to enforce regulations on food safety and health standards, such as the global gap. But there is also a closeness in geographical proximity between countries when it comes to intra-African, intra-regional trade that allow cross-border trade. You know, an example would be Rwanda, DRC, and some other members in the African community. Existing preferential trade agreements, and this is the case for COMESA. We have minimum tariffs on member countries, and specifically differences in climatic conditions or seasons or ecological environments in different regional economic communities that will necessitate shifts in terms of demand and supply factors. So there are already existing factors that allow us to trade between ourselves compared to the rest of the world. But again, there are also issues related to logistics, because moving from one country to another sometimes is not easy. When also it comes to some of the products, I'll give an example of perishable products. It's much more difficult, for example, to take fresh avocado from Rwanda to DRC by air compared to taking the same product from Rwanda to Dubai. So those are the issues that we have to deal with, but in a sense that intra-regional trade allows already trade between members within the same regional economic community. But again, we have also, as we are mandated, the country level, being the Minister of Agriculture and Resources, or being naive in this case, or the Minister of Trade, we are also mandated to have these policies that will eliminate slowly, trade to barriers, as well as looking at how we can deal with these logistical aspects that will allow countries to freely, trade. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much there, Dr. Claude. And just to piggyback off your last point, which is around transportation of avocado from Kigali to Kinshasa or vis-a-vis Kigali to Dubai. For you and Tony, food for thought as you're looking for policy, according to the IATA report that was released at the end of last month, flights within the East African Community region are the most expensive in the world for their distances. So Kigali-Nairobi is the most expensive flight in the world for its distance. And I think that brings us into the next segue, where I will bring Mr. Joseph Mutabazi from the Private Sector Federation. He's the Director of Trade and Business Development there. Investment risk, the appetite, the need of Rwanda's private sector actors, in particular in the agriculture sector, are they ready, as Patience asked earlier, are they ready to invest in fields like agriculture?
Thank you very much. I would like to, first of all, thank AKADEMIYA2063 for the invitation extended to private sector. And as my colleagues mentioned earlier, especially Patience, she mentioned some of the constraints that our agriculture sector, not actually only agriculture sector, that different sectors that usually face in terms of access to data, information, transport cost, bureaucracy, farmers accessing markets and all that. So we've been really facing different challenges in agriculture sector. But private sector players tried so much to work hard to make sure that they develop that sector. Today, as we speak, there are some good stories that we can mention, especially in seeds. We've got many investments in seed sector. I think most of you are aware that we import most of the seeds in the country from outside. But today, that has changed, especially maize seed. We no longer import. Actually, the previous season, they produced more than what was required. So they're still now struggling to make sure that they sell them to farmers. But I think that's a very good success story that's showing that private sector has been working so hard. I know it's a very long journey, but slow by slowly we should be there. Number two, something that I wanted to mention, I think Patience mentioned about 1.5 billion in terms of food imports for DRC. She was right about that. And my colleague, I think, has already stressed on that. We import more in DRC than any other country in the region. So DRC, for us to maximize those markets, we had to make sure that we make some good investments in that. And if I'm not mistaken, agriculture is almost half a contributor to the total exports of the country. So that means that there have been some work that was being done by private sector over time. Of course, it's a long journey, but I'm pretty sure that over time we'll be there. So my last point on this is that we've been trying to see how we can solve different problems as private sector, especially the constraints that we've been facing over time as farmers. Number one, like distribution of fertilizers, and number two, the climate change issues. So by the introduction of different initiatives such as greenhouses and try to see how we can regulate fertilizer distribution, that has helped so much our farmers to, to improve on what they're doing. So currently, I would say that yes, it has been a challenge over time, but we should be there soon, and private sector is in for that. Like for the example that I've just mentioned about the seeds, there is one private sector company that is contributing over 60% to solve that seed issue in the country, which calls Tri-Seed. I don't know if you heard about it. It contributes over 65%. Those are very few members that came together to create a collective company investment. They injected some money, and today we can see the results. So if we can see the tremendous results in at least one seed, which is maize, for not more than 30 investors in that company, that tells you that in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will be in a good position to push for the agenda of the government. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much there, Mr. Mutabazi. I want to bring Dr. Rutaisire, Dr. Pierre Clever Rutaisire, Principal of the College of Business and Economics at the University of Rwanda. Thank you for making the time to join us. Bringing into the conversation, I would like you to reflect on the trends to anticipate the future of trade in the East African Community region, with, of course, the focus being Rwanda. COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 exposed the fragility of many of our food systems, disrupted trade, in a way exacerbated the vulnerabilities across the board. And part of AKADEMIYA2063's research that was published, it addresses these vulnerable hotspots, staple food price tracking, production systems, disruption, the likes. So we look at COVID-19 as a black swan moment, and there is potential of another black swan moment, going by what we have learned. Could we be ready for that moment if it happens? in regards to our food systems?
Thank you, moderator. I appreciate being here, and thank you for inviting us. I'm here on behalf of the Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Diamba Baje, who I heard is a very friend of AKADEMIYA2063. For me, I think I can simply take an example of what we are seeing now with the agreement between Rwanda and DRC on the movement of border communities, what they call border communities. If you take the border with DRC, before COVID, we have been registering like 45,000 to 55,000 movement of people per day, moving from one country to another using the facility which is there, which was the what they call jeton, which is a kind of pass they are using. So I think with COVID, this really dropped a lot, and people try to use other means like choosing a representative who will be going instead of sending an association of people, for example. So I think we can't be ready enough if, let's say, we are not trying to come up with, to update, let's say, to try to bring people who are knowledgeable into the discussion. The University of Rwanda have been involved into all the processes, for example, when it comes on discussions of all related treaty like East African Treaty or the Common Market Protocol, and even the IUCA. So we are really convinced that we need to consider the university as a platform where people can really go for, let's say, to acquire knowledge, because we are high learning institutions which is producing knowledge, and we are trying as much as possible to bring the industry, the job market into our curriculums, and I'm happy to see that Mutesi is here. They have been helping us since the beginning, because we started giving modules on regional integration, and later and masters on international trade and was it law, trade law? Let me read the exact title of the training was. So this was in partnership with, of course, the University of Lund, and we had also the Eastern and Southern African Management Institute. So we developed a module training on regional integration and a master's in international trade policy and trade law. So with this, we trained 60 people were enrolled in this program, and at the end we couldn't really, they couldn't graduate all, because so this was a very demanding program. So we started by trying now to see how can we support the partners in trade in training people. So that was in 2016, 2018. But now we won a grant with the WTO on trade negotiators, training trade negotiators, because we are convinced that those are people we are really looking for in facilitating or coming towards, let's say, supporting all the partners involved in this in the trade, and to bring them on board, but also to make sure our programs in university are really responding on the demand. So to come up to what you asked about being able to, if we are facing a more difficult situation like what we have been going through with the COVID, and I think what the university tried to do is to come up with a, let's say, more sustainable way of giving that knowledge or producing that knowledge, which means we are trying to bring, to make all our training virtual, for example, and we are working now with the Minicom and Minafet really to make sure our programs are responding to the demand from our partners. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that is the direction we're heading in.
We're going to get there small. We still have time. Thank you very much. Tony, I want to bring you back into the conversation, and it's still around AFCFTA, but a topic that has been largely brought up by the three other panelists is regarding Rwanda, DRC, you know, that trade posts, 45 to 50,000 people have been crossing there, you know, prior to COVID-19. But that's a drop in the ocean if we were to tap into the AFCFTA. In a way, there are lessons though that can be picked from that. So we'll look at it as a glass half full as well. So when you look at the regional economic communities across Africa, there's still challenges that are still faced to facilitate border trade, but there are also things that we could learn from that that could help us propel into tapping fully into the AFCFTA. So what are some of the lessons that can be picked from, let's say, Rwanda, DRC, border crossings, or Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, that could be used to help us achieve AFCFTA and, in the long run, Agenda 2063?
Sure. Thank you very much. I think the EAC as a block, as a REC, you know, you'll always hear this, is the most integrated REC, is the most successful REC in terms of regional integration. And that's really because of a lot of the measures and policies that have been put in place to ensure that there is intra-regional trade. In the same World Bank economic update report that I mentioned earlier, just two quick things. One is that the DRC-Rwanda border in Rubavu is actually the second busiest in Africa, after, I think it's Zambia, DRC, right, in terms of tonnage exported between the borders. So I think as a benchmark, the DRC-Rwanda border provides a lot of examples of how intra-regional trade can work. A second, I think, important element from that study was, and unfortunately, DRC has not implemented the COMESA Free Trade Area Agreement, right? So even all of the trade that we're doing with the DRC is subject to tariff, non-tariff barriers, minimal trade facilitation. That's why DRC joining the EAC is so critical. And actually, I think today is when they're joining. So it's an auspicious day, I think, for regional integration across the board. But the EAC offers a lot of potential. And a lot of lessons that can be expanded to the AFCFTA framework as a whole. Not just the EAC, but also SADC, ECOWAS, and the other RECs that are in existence. But the EAC has been able to do a lot of important things. When the AFCFTA was being negotiated, there was the principle of equus, which is that the integration and the level of commitments that have been made at the REC level should continue, and the AFCFTA will build on them. In 1991, you know, this whole process of regional integration started with the Abuja Treaty, of actually saying, let us develop these regional RECs. Once they're solidified, let us merge them. And that is the process that we're getting at with the AFCFTA, is building on the successes of the RECs. So ECOWAS, for instance, today has negotiated the AFCFTA protocol together. EAC has negotiated together. SACU has also negotiated together. So already we're building from the successes of these RECs and the integration within regions to essentially solidify and strengthen the AFCFTA. But there is specific lessons, I think, that we can draw from the EAC experience, which will be helpful. The first is on the elimination of non-tariff barriers. Trademark East Africa, and Patience knows this very much, but in terms of elimination of NTBs, East Africa, that's probably the single greatest success of the region, or of the REC. In 2010, when Rwanda joined, there were, or since then, there were 200 plus recorded NTBs. And over a period of a decade, we've managed to eliminate 200 and I think 22 or something like that. So that elimination of those trade barriers has significantly increased how integrated we are and how much trade we're doing together. So to what percent that has increased our inter-regional trade and our economic development, I think that's something that we can extrapolate and extend to the AFCFTA. From the study that Dr. Biadame was presenting, 10% removal of NTBs and other trade barriers can increase inter-regional trade significantly. So the AFCFTA looks at building on that. And if we can implement the EAC time-bound program, as the NTB program was termed, then we can start to see a lot of potential. Many studies as well have said tariff elimination is important and it will boost intra-regional trade, but we have to go a step further and eliminate non-tariff barriers and provide trade facilitation. And trade facilitation is the harmonization of customs procedures, it's the simplification of procedures, so eliminating the bureaucracy of procedures. And there's elements that have started with that, really even agreeing on what are the minimal customs procedures and customs documents that are needed to facilitate intra-Africa trade. And those have been agreed at an AFCFTA level. Another, I think, critical point which has facilitated intra-EAC trade and which can be expanded, and a lesson, is the EAC single customs territory, the electronic single customs territory system. And this has really been a game changer in allowing the clearance of goods between countries really done at the point of entry. So for us, a lot of our trade and a lot of our goods come in from Port of Mombasa or Port of Dar es Salaam. And our customs procedures and clearance begins at that point of entry. And so that helps to cut the time and the cost that traders have when they're bringing goods in. And maybe we're fortunate, and it's unfortunate that traders, truckers have to pass away, right, in doing this important economic activity. So if we can start implementing these digital innovative tools at a continental level, I think it's going to be really critical. Another point that I think is really important for the AFCFTA, it's not so much an EAC tool as a WTO tool, and that's the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which was signed by Rwanda in 2017, but agreed and negotiated at the WTO level in 2016. Trade Facilitation Agreement has been, I would say, instrumental in allowing Rwanda to position itself as a hub for business and for trade. If you look at where we stand today in the implementation of the Trade Facilitation Agreement, we're probably one of the best in Africa. We've implemented around 83% of all of the measures that needed to be implemented as of today. So we're well ahead of the curve, but we've made it simple for goods and services to enter into the country. And what this has done is, of course, drive economic development and drive trade for the region. So if this, and it's important for us not to reinvent the wheel, right? So how do we also bring in some of these, protocols and tools that are in existence within our regs, but also at a multilateral level, into the AFCFTA. And the trade facilitation agreement is going to be critical in helping to facilitate trade on the continent. Because a lot of it has been negotiated, has been done, the blueprint is there. It's just a matter of member states, state parties committing to implementing that specific agreement. Final point that I think is also important and a lesson that we can learn while implementing the AFCFTA is the institutional capacity of national governments, but also importantly, the Secretariat. The EAC Secretariat has been really important and a driver for regional integration. The rotation of Secretary Generals, the capacity of the officials at the Secretariat has really helped to drive a lot of these policies and to hold state parties accountable. And so we must have the same level of institutional capacity and commitment at the AFCFTA level. And I think it's there with a lot of the leadership that's already in place. So just to highlight a few examples, not exhaustive for sure, but I think if we can articulate and implement some of these at the AFCFTA level, we'll start to see some of the gains. Thanks.
Tony, no, I still want to talk to Tony, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Speaking for the younger people on the continent, which is the majority of the continent, time is of the essence when it comes to the implementation of these. We are tired of seeing young Africans take the boats to find better economic opportunities out there. The brain drain on the continent is the largest for any continent in the world. So how do we ensure that we go beyond signing of these agreements, but also have them practically implemented within the time frames where it's not going to take us 10 years? You know, maybe where we can achieve Agenda 2063 before it happens. Just this week alone, we saw the outcry regarding the East African Community Monetary Union of it not going to be possible to have it by the time it was supposed, by the targeted time. So how do we ensure that Agenda 2063 happens not only for Rwanda, but for all other ESC and then AFCFTA African countries by 2063?
That's a very hard question. Especially because I can't speak for, of course, other countries. But I think it's holding governments accountable, right? And actually holding each other accountable. Private sector has a big role to play in holding government to account for the implementation of the agreement. But we also have a role to play to hold the private sector to account, to take advantage of the opportunities that are being provided. And maybe to just provide a background and a state of play of where we stand with the AFCFTA. Because I agree, there's maybe a lackluster beginning to the AFCFTA implementation. But that's because the impact of COVID-19, what it did to the negotiation process, but these are being finalized. And we should start to see trading under the AFCFTA commence very soon. But I think for us as government, it's important that we also continue to raise awareness around the AFCFTA. We've not done nearly enough in Rwanda. And this is a commitment that we're trying to make to ensure that private sector is aware of the agreement, the benefits that are expected to accrue, that the public sector is fully aware. This is not a Minicom agenda. It's not a private sector agenda. Ministry of Health has to be involved. Ministry of Environment has to be involved. Rwanda Biomedical Center have to be involved. Development partners like UNDP, Academia, Annabelle have to be involved, just to mention a few that are in the room. So it's really an all-government, all-country approach to ensure that we're implementing the agreement and that we're holding each other accountable to this, because it is a game changer. And it has the potential to drive industrialization, but critically transform our economies for the better. And we're going to start seeing the benefits of this. I'm young, and I can say that I'm optimistic to the potential of the AFCFTA. And that's really the message I think that we should be driving across the continent, that this is an optimistic and a potential game changer for our youth and for our continent.
Thank you, Tony. I want to bring Dr. Pierre back into the conversation, and because I believe Tony's last intervention is timely for the question on inclusion, policy interventions have been recommended. There's some specific ones, and I want to hear from you. What do you believe you would recommend to ascertain the delivery of inclusive economic growth, not only for Rwanda, not only for East Africa, but for Africa as a continent?
Thank you, moderator. To answer that, I'll just go into from what Tony was saying, but bring you into migration theories. If you take it at macro level, people will just move due to the facilitations the country is putting, let's say, on place, and people will take advantage of that. But if you go at individual level, and now bringing in those, the youth you are talking about who are moving, I think you have two ways of just analyzing things, saying people are putting on balance, trying to see what they are getting or what they are gaining from. They compare the place of origin to the place of destination. So if the Afcfta is putting all the facilitation, the policies there, and what is remaining is to sensitize those young people and to show them that there are possibilities, there are opportunities. Sometimes people are not simply aware of what is happening around. And it's our responsibility, not only the government, but also the private sector, the academia, to bring on board all those kind of groups and to just show them that those facilities are there and they can take advantage.
Thank you, Dr. Pierre. I want to bring Mr. Claude Bizimana back into the conversation, and as we get ready for him to give us an answer to this next question, it's a reminder that we're going to open up the floor, so get your questions ready. We already have some questions coming in from social media, so we're going to also jump into those shortly. Part of your mission at NAEB is to advise on the development of policy and strategy. A lot of conversation on policy and strategy here for developing of exports of agriculture and livestock products to meet international market requirements. Now, that approach is equally involves implementing, keyword, implementing of this policy and strategies for developing exports of agriculture and livestock products. Now, what are some of your critical priorities for Rwanda's agriculture export market over the next 5 years? And I think that's a question Dr. Usman wanted an answer to earlier as he was explaining.
I know. And basically, we have a lot of critical priorities as a sector, but I'll name a few in line with what Usman presented around 4 or 5 commodities that where we have comparative advantage compared to other countries. The first critical priority would be adding value to our primary agriculture products. Usman presented areas where we see Rwanda could have trade, advantage compared to the rest of the, the countries in the ESC community. He talked about groundnut oil. He talked about spices, hides and skins, and coffee and tea. If we are to take that advantage as a country, Rwanda, because when it comes to volumes, we know we cannot compete with countries like Uganda and Kenya, sometimes with the same agroecological conditions. So we have to compete when it comes to the value or even the quality of the agriculture products we're talking about. Rwanda has been fetching premium prices for tea in Mombasa auction for the last 10 years. But if you look at the volumes, when you compare to volumes with Kenya or Tanzania, we are very much low compared to that. But again, as I said, we've been really getting premium prices on the market. And for us also to be able to take advantage to products like groundnuts and spices being the products themselves or the processed products. Adopting standard quality assurance and compliance is very key, both at production level but also at export level. Diversifying into new export value chains. We do now export avocado oil. I've been telling you how difficult it was really, for Rwanda to export fresh produce, especially avocado, to sister countries in Africa, using Rwandan carrier or Rwanda or Ethiopian Airlines. These are passenger flights that do not really offer enough space for our product. So now moving into doing avocado oil, and avocado oil is being exported now to China with more returns to our economy compared to the revenues we used to have when sending those avocados as fresh produce to different destinations. NAEB also provides a conducive environment to private sector investment and direct foreign investment, not only in terms of access to finance, but also in terms of access to land. We do also promote the branding of agriculture export, products. For coffee, for the last 20 years, Rwanda has been exporting coffee as a semi-washed product. But for the last 10 years, we've been able to go to fully washed, which is the more specialty coffee. And we are now more entering into roasted coffee. It's more, it's still a challenge in terms of access to market, because most importing countries have put in place barriers for a finished product compared to a raw product. So you export green coffee to countries like the UK or US, it's at zero tax. But once you go to roasted coffee, you realize that the taxes move from 0 to 100 just suddenly. So those are the areas where we see, as the National Agriculture Development Board is trying to advocate more in terms of accessing those markets. And lastly, I'll also mention strengthening relations with freight services, the service providers. We are more into discussions about how can you access to cargo flights for fresh produce, to really take advantage of us being able to access to different markets, especially that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rwanda has put in place a new division, which is economic diplomacy, where we see our High Commission embassies abroad now turning more into rather opening another eye in terms of advocating trade for our product. So we really want to take advantage also to this new market through economic diplomacy, and us being able to bring at final destination the processed products. So all in all, if I would summarize, put high quality standards in terms of quality assurance and compliance, both at production and agriculture products export product level, but also be able to access to the market with the processed product that will fetch more revenues than, the fresh, they get premium prices compared to us as exporting raw materials. So if also to add probably one more thing in terms of access to finance and access to land, we know that 80% of our products are being produced by smallholder farmers, So together with the Ministry of Agriculture and RDB, we've been putting in place commercial farms where people would come, invest, and be able to produce at large scale. So this is an area where we see that it could bring in foreign investment in terms of accessing land that is more commercial, rather than really using these small-scale farms where comparative advantage when it comes to production cost is not guaranteed. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Interesting that you bring up the avocado oil. Just another report. I love numbers. I can see the DG of statistics is also here with us. The global avocado oil market lacks the produce. They say it's 40% less than what they have. And Tanzania, which is our East African Community member state, produces 80% of what goes there. So I think it's a good ground for creating some competitive advantage for Rwanda. So that takes me to the private sector, who are supposed to be the vehicle of instrument for this competitiveness. Now, PSF has had a few key lessons from global networking experiences across Africa, across the world that you have come to learn from over the past years. So how can you better position Rwandan produce on the world market, Mr. Joseph Mutabazi?
Thank you, Arnold. I think it's fair to say that over time we've been planning for these international trade missions in different countries, Africa, and in different outside of Africa, and we could see the trend. The trend has been consistent in terms of exports, because as you insisted on CFTA, some delays when you are discussing with Mr. Tony, we thought that it's very important for us to have different bilateral trade agreements to make sure that we don't lag behind waiting for CFTA in case of any delay. And that has been really so helpful in terms of pushing for our made in Rwanda products in different countries. And but of course we've learned different lessons, of course, from especially on commodity standards, because that has been one of the issues that affecting our exports across the world. So those are the key lessons that we've been learning through those missions. But again, we have pushed so much for exports in all those countries that we travel in. I think one example that I can, one of the success stories that I can mention here is that we have visited one of Central African countries. This is Central African Republic. We visited them at, I think now it's 1 year. But within 12 months, we managed to establish different activities in that country, whereby now we have a collective investment that has already established a business of over $1.5 million in different areas. That is mining, and agriculture, different areas. So we have another project that is ongoing, which is commercial buildings in Karl. It's a very big building. That I think it's the best in Karl. He's a Rwandan who is doing that. So we have different success stories through those international trade missions that we've been conducting. Of course, apart from learning, good best practices in terms of, technology, in terms of standards of our products and all that, but we've managed at least to set up some businesses in those countries. So I think as we speak, we can see the progress over time, and this is going to be like a fallback plan in case CFTA delays a little bit due to different reasons. Yeah.
I want to stay with you there, Joseph, and just want to use again the Central African Republic as an example that you've hinted on. An example of Rwandan businesses setting up in the Central African Republic. You have, let's say, Rwanda Trade Mission as of today that is in Zimbabwe as well. African businesses or African investors investing in African countries as being important for Afcfta and ensuring that that happens. Why is it important for us to push that the investment by African businesses into African countries?
This is going to be the initial, I think, support of the CFT as well, because CFT is coming in when you already established different bilateral agreements with our counterparts in different countries. This has been so helpful in terms of reducing NTBs, because when we sign different bilateral agreements, we agree on X, Y, Z, areas that are going to be worked on to improve our trade between the two countries. So I think CFT is going to be an engine to push what has been already in place in terms of trade between our different countries. And by pushing for these ones, I think it has already supported our local products to sell in different African countries. Because we've been, exporting products from Africa to Europe, to Asia, to the US and all that. But now, if we are focusing in Africa, that is going to be helpful to sell products in our colleagues where we understand each other, mostly in terms of first of all, the climate change, in terms of the pricing and all that. And of course, if we can sort out the issue of transportation, that is going to be so helpful, because it doesn't really make sense, as you mentioned earlier, that the cost of transport from here to Nairobi is the highest. So if we are like neighbors with Kenya, we should work out something with that. So I think this approach is going to be helpful, and it's going to also contribute so much to CFT as well.
Thank you, Joseph. Allow me to open up to the audience to be able to ask a few questions. We can see the lady to my left who she would like to ask a question. I would like to ask you to mention your name and who you're directing your question to, and maybe potentially the organization that you work for or represent, if you are comfortable doing that. Then there's a gentleman to my right as well, so I'd like to give them the microphone to ask those questions.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Aissa Touresar. I'm the country manager of African Development Bank in Rwanda. Actually, I raised my hand very quickly because my my first comment was related to the cost of transport. As you know, Rwanda has done very, very well in terms of transport investment, right? So the bank only, African Development Bank, we have invested 400 million in developing the networks in Rwanda. And yet, transport accounts for 40% of the importation costs, right? In Rwanda, compared to Kenya, you might know that 12%, or Uganda, 33%. It gives you, how expensive it is, despite the fact that the increase in the networks has reduced the times of transportation, has reduced the cost, but yet we are at 40%, which also has to be, taken into consideration in the conversation. And the reasons are many, but I think, despite Tony, I agree that the non-tariff barriers have decreased, but yet we have a long way to go, because this is one of the reasons why the cost is so important and expensive compared to other countries. We also have the poor networks, for instance, in the Northern Corridor to Mombasa, or Eastern Corridor to Tanzania. Fortunately, at least for Tanzania side, they are working on it. So we hope that in the coming years, this will also be an improvement that will help reduce the costs. And maybe for your information, Tanzania, yes, is looking for, will invest in the railway, and I think that I haven't heard this in the conversation. So when we talk about transport, it's not only road, but many countries, including Rwanda, is interested in a railway, right? And I think it's expensive, but I think in the long run, it can help reduce the cost. This is my first comment. The second one is to speak to how inclusive we want this regional trade to look like, especially for SMEs or for smallholder farmers. We're talking about agriculture. 2 weeks ago, we had 4 days here to check. We had a conversation at the DPR meeting, the Development Partners Retreat with the government, where UNECA was saying that when we speak about how private sector can benefit from the African Free Trade Agreement, we need to think big firms, and meaning that it will benefit more big firms than SMEs. And to me, this is a bit worrisome because they are the bulk of the private sector. How do we hook them and make them key players of that one? And I think it requires, as somebody has said in the panel, to put our efforts together to see how this big, the bulk of the private sector could benefit from it. The same for smallholder farmers, Claude, right? We're talking about here with agriculture, but they are the majority of the farmers, access to land, access to technology, access to information, to data. All these are very important and should also be played out at different levels for us to be able to have those 5 value chains that Usman has identified, Academia has identified as potential for Rwanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Felicia Usengumukiza. I'm from Rwanda Governance Board. Probably you are asking yourself how governance, what is doing in trade. Yeah, because governance in fact is everything. Now, besides being a member of Rwanda Governance Board, because I'm in charge of research in the Rwanda Governance Board, but I used to be also academia in the lecture at the University of Rwanda, and I'm also economist. Now, my intervention, it's not a question, it's a comment from presentation of Dr. Usman and our panelists. It's issue related to intra-Africa trade, the challenges we are facing. My observation is that although we are dealing with agriculture product in regional economic integration, but the first challenge I'm facing, specifically in Africa, it's about how we are conducting our regional integration. The issue is that regional integration in Africa is rather motivated by geographical rapprochement or proximity, rather than macroeconomic convergence. The reason why, the result of this is that trade is still raw between countries. I like the way CEO Claude Bizimana highlighted the trade between Rwanda and the DRC, not being a member of East African community, around 80% of agriculture products going to DRC. This is one result of lack of macroeconomic convergence in our regional integration. This is also a result of many countries in the community or in the bloc are establishing a long list of items to be yet protected against elimination of tariff barriers. Because countries are not ready yet in terms of integrating the community. And another challenges I see, if we remember, the one objective of regional integration is trade creation. But most of our countries are rather going through trade diversion, whereby they are enjoying establishment of external tariff against non-state members. Yet, our product from the region, I mean, cost of production is still high. Who can explain why rice from Pakistan or Vietnam is still cheaper than rice from Tanzania or from our region? This lack of economic of scale. And when you see the structure for our agriculture productivity, our farmers, most of them are producing just for direct consumption. And in the case of Rwanda, we have around, DJ and I said can assist me in terms of figures, we have around 71% of population employed in agriculture. Yet, agriculture contributes to GDP around 27% only. You see this kind of discrepancies between population employed in agriculture and contribution of agriculture to the GDP, meaning that our system of doing business in agriculture, we are still using traditional method, archaic method, rather than specialization in this sector. And for me, I'd like to advocate maybe to see how we can change the way we are doing business in terms of specialization in agriculture sector. Because if we remember why, our target in Vision 2020 was to reduce population employed in agriculture by 50%. Just to make sure that really people who are employed in agriculture are specialized, rather than having just a population calling them farmers, yet they are not really doing this business. This is one of strategy we'd like to have in order to make sure that really what we are doing is meeting our expectation. In a few words, and I'd like to say that other country, remote from the sea, landlocked, we have to see what kind of competitiveness aspect we can have. Yeah, some people are proposing related to how we can see if we can create some kind of agro-processing industry to create some added value of product from the region to serve as service hub, maybe as some of you highlighted. That is why for me, really, discussing about these topics, and I'd like to see how we strategically, Minister of Minicom is here around, at policy level to see really how we can change the way we are doing business to position our country in terms of really identify some area where we can be more competitive rather than continuing trading traditional items in the region. This is my observation in terms of really this discussion, and I really appreciated the way academia organized it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Murango Yusuf. I'm the Director General, National Institute of Statistics. Today I'll skip numbers. The numbers I've seen are already very good, so I can afford to skip them for now. First of all, I want to congratulate Dr. Osman. The presentation is very brilliant. From the discussions that we see at policy level and especially also at development cooperation level, so many things get discussed. But in our context, Rwanda and other countries similar to Rwanda, one of the biggest challenges that we see that if addressed properly can lead to improved living conditions of our populations, and of course solving other related challenges that come with that, is the issue of production, improving production, and making sure that production gets to good markets. If we can solve those two things, in fact, almost all countries that have made it have solved those two things. You make sure your population produces, keeps on improving the production, and you make sure that produce gets to good markets. Not any market, but good markets. Then you solve poverty, you solve so many things. And this kind of analysis that we've seen today actually points into that direction. So we see the issues, we're understanding our context, our environment, we see where we have competitiveness, then we see opportunities in this kind of analysis, and then we see what we can do about it. And I've liked the 3 points that were highlighted. Simple points. You know, sometimes we do very complicated macroeconomic modeling and we confuse everyone. But now, academia comes with 3 issues. One, can we reduce the costs of doing this kind of business and exporting and doing everything? This is something that anyone can understand. And if we can pinpoint areas where the costs are high, and you have the Ministry of Commerce, and you have all institutions that are concerned, these are things that can be quickly addressed. Increasing productivity. These are things that, for example, the Ministry of Agriculture can say, no, productivity, seeds, the private sector just talked about seeds, and fertilizers, and whatever, 3, 5 things, they don't have to be many. Work on them, make sure productivity improves. Then also barriers. Sometimes, you know, barriers can be from other countries, putting barriers to a country. Actually, we've seen in some cases where a country puts barriers for itself to access markets. So we can look at those kind of barriers quickly, and if those things get resolved, then we make it. And we continuously monitor what is happening, and then we get feedback, and then so and so. So I'm very happy. I think the presentation is very good. And we look forward to more of this kind of analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yusuf. Welcome back to our panel before we take the last round of questions. The reason I'm coming back to our panel, there are things that have been hinted on. I'll start with the country manager of African Development Bank. 40% of costs, and Tony, I'm coming to you, are largely down to transport. So at Minicom, at the ministry, in this regard, she mentioned 2 points. So the first one, Tony, I'm coming to you. Then second, Claude, of course, to do with the smallholder farmers and SMEs. 40% of costs are largely down to transport. That increases everything. I think if Dr. Yusuf is the right segue there, the inflation numbers coming in as of today, the numbers being shared by the central bank, are not very flattering. How does the ministry, how are you working to curb those costs to ensure that things become more affordable and that, you know, production in the long run is more sustainable? And then the second question to you, Mr. Claude, is, you know, who are we trying to include when it comes to us talking about regional trade? We're speaking for largely the big manufacturers, but SMEs are the backbones of most of our economies. How do we ensure that SMEs are part of the inclusive Afcfta agenda? Tony?
Thank you, Arnold, and thank you, Country Director. I think transport absolutely is one of the biggest barriers to trade, especially for Rwanda. That and the high cost of electricity. I think those are the 2 critical areas that in PSF advocacy they're always bringing up. I would say we handle this 2 ways. Well, maybe even as a preface to that, we have to recognize that we're landlocked. And being so far from the ports, there's added transport costs. And this adds to the uncompetitiveness sometimes of our domestic production, but also of our exports, because of how long and how far we have to export our commodities. So how do we handle this without, you know, uprooting all of Rwanda and moving it? We do this by trade facilitation, right? Addressing some of the costs of trading, simplifying trading, minimizing the bureaucracy, removing trade barriers that are locally or domestically implemented. And we've been on that reform process for some time. The cost of transport itself has gone down over the last decade. I think a container from Mombasa was something like $6,000. Today it's $3,000. It's still high, but we're seeing those costs reduce. Same with Mombasa, Dar es Salaam. Came down, I think, from 4,000, 5,000 to about 2,500 now. And even the time itself is also reducing. But it's still not good enough. So what we need to do in the interim is to ensure that we're putting in place trade facilitation measures that removes all the other costs. Cost for certifications, cost for inspections. We're doing a lot in terms of advanced rulings, in terms of pre-clearance of commodities when they enter, providing trade facilitation tools such as advanced economic operators, blue channel access, really to ensure that we're doing as much as possible to, on our side, reduce how much time a trader is spending once they reach the border. That I think is one aspect. The second is going to have to be improving infrastructure development. And the standard rail gauge is going to be absolutely important here. We have to invest in a railway network with our regional partners. Through the Central Corridor, this is something that's already in the works, that is being implemented, and we're looking forward to ensuring that we can fast track and spearhead this, ensuring that a railway can connect Dar es Salaam to Kigali to Goma and allow for that swift and hopefully cheap movement of goods. I think a third point, and this has become even more important because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also because of the Russia-Ukraine war, is localizing industrial development and what we're able to produce. Maybe not locally in Rwanda, but within the region, showing that we can develop those value chains closer to home so that we also reduce the cost of transportation. If you're bringing a good from China, it should be cheaper than if you're bringing good from Zambia or Zimbabwe or somewhere else. And I think there's a lot of efforts being made there. I'll let Claude handle the issue of SMEs because I think it's a tough one.
Well, again, thank you very much for your contribution. And it's much more easier even to link to the question about large versus small holder farms in relation to the 3 points that were highlighted by the DG NSR. Rwanda has been implementing a land consolidation program to be able to deal with issues related to economies of scale, what Dr. Felicien talked about, but also efficiency, as well as proximity to extension services. So these are the areas where we see contribution of smallholder farmers contributing to good agricultural products. We said, the DG NSR said, if we're able to produce good quality at low costs and then access to the right markets. But again, there is also a question of productivity, which calls for R&D of appropriate technologies, which is what we're trying to do at the policy level, and looking at barriers, how we can, eliminate some trade barrier, some barriers in terms of trading with other countries. I like the fact that you also mentioned that we could have even barriers within a specific country. We've been seeing it when it comes to exporting agricultural products, with new institutions coming in place, bringing new regulations, standards, sometimes contradicting to what already exists. So I totally agree in terms of trying to deal with barriers within a specific country, as well as eliminating those barriers with the remaining with the rest of the world. Cost of production is still very important. We're not talking about SMEs, like in the industry, a form of it, because Tony would go into that. But if you talk about an SME, if you talk about a farmer, who is operating 0.01 hectare and importing or buying fertilizers or pesticides or getting access to exchange services, that is much more expensive. That's what through the land consolidation program, Rwanda is trying at least to help these smallholder farmers getting together and being able to access or being able to have economies of scale around that kind of program, as well as efficiency. I talked about access to land. We're also trying to have this new scheme where foreigners or direct, foreign direct investment would come into investing on a land that would provide those kind of advantages. So we're not saying this is more specific to, larger farms, but it's also more specific to these small operating farms in terms of consolidating them, make them viable for us to be able to have good quality of agriculture product, but also not that expensive for us to be able to be competitive on the market.
Thank you. Tony has something to add to that, then we open up for the last round of questions, okay, we'll take 2 more rounds of questions. Looks like lots of questions.
Just very quick on SME for exports, because this is really interesting, and I have no doubt it came up in the DPR meeting, and it's come up in several other forums. It has to do with survivability of exporters and exporting firms. By survivability, we're talking about how long a product or a firm survives in the export market. What we've seen, and BNR did a really interesting study on this, is that almost 50% of products that export the first year do not survive into the second year. 50%. Within the third year, that falls down to almost 90%. So the number of firms that are surviving beyond 3 years are very few. Now, if you even go a step further and look at those firms surviving beyond 3 years, they're firms that are bigger and that are exporting higher value products. And so that also tells us a lot as policymakers in terms of where do we need to focus our efforts. I don't think moving away completely from SMEs is the right approach, because SMEs are the heart and the bloodline of any economy. So we need to make sure that we're putting in place policy measures to support this. How do you do that? I think the answer is in what CEO Claude said, consolidation. We can do consolidation for smallholder farmers, but how do we also start to do consolidation for other SMEs that are exporting? In horticulture, we saw that this was a great success. Today, Rwanda is a horticulture exporting country because NAEB provides consolidation-related services. So can we expand this to other manufactured value-added products? This morning, actually, I was thinking about this. I love to eat snacks at home. Peanuts, lentils, things like this. Almost all of my snacks at home are made in Rwanda. And for me, that is not by design as somebody who works in Ministry of Trade, but the quality of our products has increased. But those same products, to be found in an export market or in another country, is very difficult. So how are we able to group some of these exporters together who are manufacturing nuts, lentils, potato chips, other agro-processed manufactured goods, but that are essentially small SMEs, so that we can start to ensure that they can survive longer on the export market. And I think that's maybe an approach that we can take, while also ensuring that the big exporters who are exporting higher value products can also be supported. Thanks.
Tony, I think you're opening another can of worms there. Japan, South Korea, inward, outward, differing, but you still get to the same goal. I believe there's a comment there coming in from Joseph as well. Then we'll go to Moses, the UN coordinator, and the two ladies at the front as well.
Thank you, Arnold. I think mine is very brief. I just wanted to comment on transport and what has been done by private sector. I think part of the issue in terms of the increase of transport was COVID-19. We have seen different countries reintroducing NTBs that were already waived before COVID, taking advantage of COVID. But as private sector, we came up with the initiative of bringing together different players on the market and see how they can put together funds and buy some trucks, Rwandan trucks, because part of the main contributors of the high cost of transport was relying on foreign transport. You know, we've been using Kenyan, Ugandan, Tanzanian transport. So we said, how can we now be out of that cave and come up with an idea that is going to, you know, to facilitate Rwandans to have their trucks. So they came together and they start slow. Today, they have over 100 trucks, Rwandan registered trucks. So I think that's part of the reduction of the cost that we are talking about. I think Tony has just mentioned. So, and I think it's, of course, we are still mobilizing members to chip in to see how we can fully now have Rwandan trucks. That is going to, I think, to decrease the cost of transport tremendously over time. So, yes, the cost is still high, but there is a hope that, at least in the near future, that is going to be sorted out. Thanks.
Thank you, Joseph. So we'll go to the questions. Ladies first, of course. I'd like the mic to be given to you. Please introduce yourself and what your intervention or question is.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Emerance Tushime. I'm the acting CEO of the Pan-African Farmers Organization, which is a continental platform of farmers organization representing about 70 organizations of farmers from 49 African countries. So the office is based here in Kigali. So it is, I will say, a potential that Rwanda has to have a home of all African farmers in Kigali. So I have a few comments, and then I will ask one or two questions for the panelists. So first I would like to put emphasis on the potential of farmers. You know, farmers, they are, I would say, the most organized sector for development in Africa. Starting from local communities, we have a group of farmers, we have cooperatives. At national level, we have a confederation of cooperatives, we have syndicates of farmers. At regional level, it is the same thing. They've been talking about the Eastern African community. We have a platform that brings farmers in Eastern African community, and it goes up to the continental level and the global level. So I think, speaking about the Afcfta, so farmers should be at the center, because they are the first producer of the food commodities we are talking about. So without farmers, we should not even be talking about agriculture, because it doesn't exist. So the most important thing here is to make sure that farmers' representatives are included in all processes. From the formulation level, there is a study done by the PAFO, Pan-African Farmers Organization, whereby you have seen that during the formulation phase of Afcfta, farmers was not fully engaged into the process. Yet, if we are here to take the decisions on things that will benefit farmers, they should be the one to be consulted at first, because they are the ones who understand the reality of the fields and what is needed to make sure that we reach the agricultural transformation we are talking about. Now that we are in implementation phase, so let's see how we can engage farmers now. We cannot go back, but there is a way forward. How do we engage farmers? There are several ways we can do that. First is to include them into different processes. Here we are talking about the implementation. We are talking about bringing in those facilities that can facilitate the trade. Does farmers know those facilities exist? Are those facilities in place? Are they adaptable to the realities of farmers on the fields? So that is one of the things we should be thinking about. And then let's talk about the production. We are talking about increase of production. Who are there to produce are farmers. So we increase the capacities of farmers, you know, to be able to produce more in terms of quality, but also in terms of quantity. we've been talking, I've been hearing about, the challenge of Rwanda competing with agriculture commodities coming from other countries. But I think we should here be focusing on the quality of what we produce. If we cannot be able to compete in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality, we have a full potential to do so. And I'm glad through the presentation that has been done, it is one of the positive things that came out from that. So also let's see the flow of information. We are talking about initiatives. How do we make sure that farmers on grassroots level have access to information? It is good that academia have done an excellent work to produce data, but those data, the way they are presented, is it simplified in a way that farmers will be able to understand them and will be able to base on the data produced, to see how they can improve in the future. So that's where the role of farmers organizations come in. That's why we always insisted that farmers organizations need to be put at the center, because they are the ones who understand the language of farmers. So different stakeholders, you do excellent work, but farmers organization, we are here. We are open to work with you to make sure that your work is simplified in a manner that farmers will be able to understand and will be able to know what they need to do to make sure that we attain any objective we are having going forward. So another thing I would like to comment in is for the intervention of Mr. Claude about attracting investment, the larger multinational corporate, to invest in agriculture. Yes, it is a good initiative to make sure that the country produce what is needed. But here my concern is there is one of from audience have talked about that Rwanda have over 70% of population which are employed in agriculture. So it is good to bring more investment, but the 70% who are surviving because of agriculture, there should be a way to think. Then, if we are going to take land to the investor, as we are saying, how are they going to survive? I believe most of us come from a family of farmers. I start with myself. I'm also a farmer. So those families should always be the priorities. Let's help them. They have a potential. They have a will. They are dedicated. But they need support from different stakeholders, from government, to make sure that they bring the production we are looking for, and they have capacity to do so. So that's why I will always insist that work with structures of farmers at national, at regional, at continental level. Now we have an issue of increase of food commodities. It is now a reality in Rwanda, and I believe in many African countries. So if we are talking about, let's try to increase the production, but also to have affordable food for mostly, I would say, smallholder farmers, because if you go to the economic terms, so they are the ones who still, who still not able to afford, food, even if they are the ones who produce. So by seeing the potential that is in connecting farmers from different regions, there is a potential, I would say, on how to link farmers from one country. Let's say if Rwanda is good in producing maize, then we link them to Congolese farmers who are good in producing maize, cassava. It's just an example I'm giving. So through the structure that exists, we have that capacity of connecting farmers from different countries. So in summary, that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very passionate plea there. Please, we're going to limit it to one question per person. And then, let's go straight to the point.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Tsitsi Makombe, and I work as the Director of External Relations with AKADEMIYA2063. First, I just want to say thank you to our panelists. I've enjoyed the very engaging discussion. My question perhaps could go to either Claude or Tony. As you may know, the African Union has designated 2022 as the year of nutrition to bring attention to nutrition, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic that has threatened food systems, health systems, and food security in Africa, and it was projected to add the number of hungry and malnourished people on the African continent. So as we talk about expanding regional trade and expanding trade opportunities for Rwanda, from the work that you're doing, what are you doing to make sure that trade contributes to improved nutritional outcomes? Thank you.
Take the gentleman at the back, Moses, I believe.
Thank you so much. I'm called Moses Gahiji. I'm a business journalist with East African. The panelists talked about non-tariff barriers that have been eliminated over the last few years, the last decade. But in the last 3 years, we saw what I can call trade extermination because of the border closures between Rwanda and Uganda, and also Burundi in the last few years. And so I want to take this platform is, to me, it looks pretty strong and well situated in trade relations in the region. Do you have plans to maybe come up with a platform or a strong lobby group that will try to make a case to the political leaders in our region in the sense of minimizing the cost or the challenges that come with, these political feuds that might come up in the region? Today we are seeing DRC joining the bloc, but maybe a few years down the road, there could be a challenge between the, the political institutions, and then we see that trade come to a standstill. So I want to understand if you have plans to make a strong lobby group, lobby platform that can put task to to our political leaders, such that some of these decisions can be averted. So, and then also research, because we need to know the cost of the border closure in the last 3 years across the entire chain, from smallholder farmers to cross-border traders to big traders whose traders come to a standstill, a complete halt. So we also need to know some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. I will take the last question from the one UN coordinator, resident coordinator for Rwanda.
Thank you very much.
The microphone is being brought to you, sir.
Thank you very much. For the sake of time, I will not really take the floor for many questions that I had or comments, but I will just say that I want to thank AKADEMIYA2063. I think their motto speaks by itself. The expertise we need, the Africa we want. And I think the presentation done by Dr. Bajan and the dialogue we are having here are very clear that we have the expertise we need in Africa in implementing successfully the African continental free trade area for the benefit of our people. But I think my questions are related to the following aspect. One is the economic policy and the stability in the region, I think, is one of the biggest either opportunity or threat. Because investment like stability, like forecast, like, and the perceived risk are hampering the cost of capital or investment in the sub-region. So I think, how do you see that featuring in the overall transforming the potential that Dr. Bajan has already mentioned to a reality? And in Rwanda, the cost of capital is very high. How do you see the financial sector or the capital market or impact bond or green bonds playing their role in supporting, including the small farmers that have been mentioned?
I want also maybe, Tony, if you could elaborate on what you mentioned, the industrialization, but more importantly, the regional value chain. How do you see it featuring and supporting the national strategy for transformation in Rwanda? And maybe, Claude, if you could elaborate, we have done the food system summit, and we had a very productive national dialogues. I guess that the pathway and the game changers that are under design might impact the conversation that we are having here in this discussion. Last point, moderator, I think that sometimes we are looking at external markets, but I do think also we need to build our internal market. How the quality of growth is inclusive in order to create income for Rwandan population, tackling inequalities and tackling poverty, and creating a stronger middle class for discretionary spending is also important in the conversation we are having, as we have seen in many countries. And this is something I think the role of diaspora, domestic resource mobilization, the role of Rwanda being a hub of financial capital is important to build on and bringing in the farmers. Thank you very much for listening and the time given to me, and thank you for the invitation, Usman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very strong points that have been shared. So I'm going to distribute these across the board, and allow me to start with Mr. Moses Gahiji's comment regarding trade extermination. Cause of closures, do you have plans to ensure we don't have a repeat of trade closures? I want to throw that to Dr. Pierre, coming in from the academic side on this panel. You were talking about all these trade negotiations that are being taught. Yeah, and just after you, I want also Joseph to piggyback on that to tell us how the private sector can ensure that we can go beyond the political leadership to ensure that we don't have these trade closures. And with that, the last question, which was regarding the potential for internal markets. So I think that's something the Private Sector Federation also is looking at. So we'll first do those two gentlemen, then I'll end it with Claude and Tony with the lion's shares of questions.
Thank you, moderator, for this complicated question. And before going to that, I was really ready to probably come to the question raised by the Farmer Pan-African Association. And for us as a university, what we are doing now is to try to answer to the questions on the mismatch between the graduates we are producing and what is requested in the market. Sometimes we are getting comment or criticism that our graduates are lacking some knowledge or soft skills. So what we are now trying to do is to bring the industry or the job market or partners from different fields in the university to participate in the reviews of our programs. This is what we'll be doing this April and May. So if you are getting our invitation, please participate, because you will be happy later, because we'll be producing graduates who are really fitting to your needs. And to come to what you are now asking, I think you have now a good opportunity because as I told you at the beginning, we got a grant from WTO which will go from this year to 2026. And in this we have 3 components. One is on research. Probably we will be invited to participate research activities on boosting regional trade integration, trade policies, regional integration, trade course and trade facilitations, implications of Afcfta for land-linked countries. So we have also curriculum activities. Those are things will request partners to participate into, let's say, tailored curriculum to really respond to the needs of our partners or in the country in general. We have also outreach activities which will be into workshops. So as we started with now the MINAFET, trying to see how to come up with modules on trade negotiations. Minicom also is part of this grant. So we are looking to candidates like in your organization who can also benefit from that. So if you approach the university, the College of Business and Economics, I think we can fix that. So to come back to your question on what happened, for example, between Rwanda and recently Uganda or Burundi, I think it's a very complicated, let's say, question, because when you are dealing with the migration, you try to open up to facilitate people, let's say movement of people, movement of services, goods. You also have to understand when, for example, policymakers are afraid of what will happen to their economies, but also in terms of security. And this has become very complicated to deal with, and it's now something as academia you will hardly had an answer for it. So I'll leave it to politicians. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much. Moses, regarding your question on data or that and the effects of that, I think a conversation with patients after this, because Trademark East Africa, I believe, have been collecting data regarding the cross-border tradings and the effects that are there. So that data is available. So I think a conversation with her after this could help resolve that query. Joseph, what can the private sector do?
I think the question
are not doing.
You posed to me. I will leave it to Mr. Tony because I don't want to go in that route. But I think what I can say is that we remain ready for any business cooperation as private sector. Make sure that because at the end of the day, we have realized that political will is everything in business. So when there is no political will, sometimes, we face some different challenges. Even these NTB that we've been talking about several times, when you think and you see the details of that, you could see that the political will is behind that. Maybe, I don't want to bring many examples. Tony is in the right position to do that. But we could see in the past, even during COVID period, where we face different challenges on different borders, and you could see that the only way out is going to be political will. So, as business operators and private sector, we remain ready to work with our counterparts in different countries when we get the green light from our leaders. But again, I think I would like to thank our government that they have provided this business environment, which is very conducive to even our investors from outside. We are really seeing a good progress in terms of investors that are ready to invest in Rwanda. Most of them will work with them closely, and they are ready to invest in our local projects already. So I think that is something that I wanted to mention, that the government of Rwanda is really doing good in terms of providing that ease in doing business. So private sector, we are ready, but when such issues, of course, arise, we usually don't have much control over it. What we need to do is just to clean our house to make sure that we are ready whenever the opportunities rises. We are ready to grab them. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I disagree heavily, but conversation for another day. Claude, before all this, Tony is being thrown under the bus, literally. before we go to Tony, the lady from the CEO of the Pan-African Farmers Association, she had emphasis on farmers' potential, and then the need to know more about their views and development. So in that regard, what role is an organization like NAEB doing to ensure that farmers' organizations are part of the Afcfta conversations?
I think the question now is, are farmers recognized in basically, I'm not going to use agriculture now, or I'm not going to use trade, but rather food systems. That sums up what we're talking about, because agriculture would be like one component and trade would be another. But food systems would be a sum of actors and interactions along the value chains. And this starts from input, supply, production, of agriculture commodities being crops, livestock, fish, going even to trade, even going to transportation and processing, but also cooking. So if I say food systems, that's where you see even the crucial role of farmer within the food system. So I totally agree. Farmers should be and in the center of the food systems. And as the coordinator of A1UN said, Rwanda has been able to organize food systems dialogue as part of their continental agenda or even the global agenda to sensitize around the need to have farmers not only in the center of the food systems, but also to look at those interactions of different components along the value chains. So this is something something we understand and we give value, not only at NAEB but also at the country level, in the Ministry of Agriculture more particularly. The question from Tsitsi now is more into the contribution of trade to nutrition. If I were to summarize what Usman presented in the morning, I would say more trade would enable production of food from, let's say, higher, producing, countries or producers to, lower cost producers. That's more into trading. But trade has also the potential of availing nutritious food by allowing cross-border, trade between different countries and availing more food that could be accessible to countries. So trade has also that potential in terms of allowing to increase availability of foods and diets. So this is in addition to what countries can produce individually. I don't know whether that responds to your question, but it's not more about moving from higher, producing, countries to that makes sense in terms of comparative advantage, because that was the whole discussions. What Rwanda can produce that can take advantage compared to the rest of the world. But now we're talking about trading for more opportunities of diet, but also more opportunities of food. Yeah. So, is that fine? Yeah, comme ci, comme ça.
Maybe I can add.
But again, there was also a question saying small versus large. I wasn't more into saying we're going in this direction. It's more about precision agriculture. It's more about bringing new technologies, bringing R&D into what we do so that we got products that we want, or high quality products, very nutritious products with the low cost. So it's more into allowing investment and access to capital and also access to research. It's not us saying we go this way, we eliminate this category of farmers and going to this. It's more about addition to what we do so that we get to good products at a lower cost. So access to capital, access to information, R&D, technology, that's what we're talking about that could be brought within the context of smallholder farmers. Yeah.
Thank you, Claude. Claude talked about R&D. Simple start as we wind up with Tony, we come to you. Africa still, as a continent, we invest less than 5% of our GDP into R&D. Israel, as a country, invests more than 12% of their GDP into R&D. So, yeah, I guess more food for thought. Tony, where do I begin from? Okay. I think the question by Makembe has been answered regarding trade's role. Joseph said you should talk about the trade extermination question. I think we'll start from there. Then there's also the question from the one UN resident coordinator regarding regional value chain support to ensure that there's the national economic transformation. Let's start there.
Thank you very much. Definitely left me with a hard question here. But I think, and this, yes, can you hear me? Is this okay? I think this has been articulated very often and across different forums of government. So it's really just to reiterate. But there's various mechanisms to resolve trade disagreements. There is, of course, the East African community and the mechanisms and the frameworks in place to address these. This is where a lot of the NTBs have been addressed. I mean, these are over 200, and a lot of them as, I would say, sensitive and as important as any that we're discussing. So the national and the regional monitoring committees that address these NTBs are a great framework to address trade disagreements. So that I would say is the first. There's joint border committees that are in existence between member states that are also there to help address a lot of these disagreements, and those will continue to be a forum under which a lot of these disputes are discussed and addressed. And I think we're often, you look at what is in the news rather than what has been resolved behind the scenes. And those are often the many that are being resolved really on a day-to-day basis that affect business. And then there's bilateral frameworks that are in place as well. And these are at all levels of government, whether at the head of state level or ministers level or even technicians level, right? So even these, I think, are frameworks that are in place to help address a lot of these disagreements. Recently, we had an issue with transport and the road tolls that were being imposed by some countries. And this was addressed bilaterally, really behind the scenes, and very quickly, right, to allow for the continued movement of goods and services as cross-border. So I think the dual approach is there. It's a framework that's in place. It's a framework that has been applied, and that's working. And I think even moving forward, that's something that will continue to be used, not just in Rwanda, and not just under the EAC, but Afcfta and even at a multilateral level. Before maybe moving to one resident coordinator's questions, just to touch on Tsitsi's, I hope I got the name right, questions, because I think when it comes to food nutrition, there's a lot that's being done, and unfortunately the minister had to step out, but a lot in terms of incentives that are being put in place by the government to help subsidize the cost of production for farmers, so that they can be able to produce. And here I'm talking about fertilizers, for instance, heavily subsidized, especially during COVID, to help farmers gain the inputs to be able to do this. There's a lot that needs to be done, and that has been done around post-harvest handling, really in ensuring that the yields and the production that is made available can reach the market. And so a lot of these post-handling activities are being put in place. There's what we're doing at Minicom with establishing a warehouse receipt system, which is really to ensure that we can start to orient the sector, the agricultural commodities trading sector, into more of a business and exchange dynamic. And I think this is really going to help with storage of agricultural commodities, but trading of agricultural commodities as well. So we don't have year-round fluctuations throughout the year. And I think this will help with nutrition, but also sustainability of our production. And then finally, there's a school feeding program within schools to help address nutrition. What we found is when it comes to protein for children, especially around issues of stunting and underdevelopment, we produce a lot of milk, a lot of eggs, a lot of chicken, but you're not seeing this in the dietary elements of Rwandans. And so trying to implement this program with different institutions, Minagri, the National Early Childhood Development Center, really ensuring that we can provide high protein, high nutrient food to schools and to children really at a young age. So just to highlight that in complementing what Claude has said. Touching on investments, because I think this is very critical and very important. Predictability is going to be everything for the AFCFTA, and I think you've touched on this. The AFCFTA protocol under phase 2 has an investment protocol that's being negotiated. And this is being put in place to help promote, protect, and facilitate investments, intra-Africa investments. The protection side, I think, is always the most important. Promotion and facilitation are just as critical, but if investors don't feel that their investments are protected across the continent, then they're not going to invest. And so it's really important that we put in place a protocol that provides that predictability and that safety net for investors. And I think once that protocol is in place, we will start to see investors from capital-rich countries look at Africa seriously and look at the potential that the AFCFTA has to offer. I think Rwanda is well placed to be the gateway for that increased capital into the continent, not just because of the conducive business environment that we've established over the years, but also because of the recent reforms with the Kigali International Financial Center, really establishing the country and the financial center as a gateway to attract foreign capital and disperse it and deploy it across the continent. And we're starting to see Rwandan investment also starting to go outward. So how do we ensure that we can protect it and facilitate it with mechanisms like the KIFC? Regarding industrialization and the regional value chains, this is really important, and I think this is where we need to shift gears moving forward in the next decade of our trade policy. And we're actually in the process of reviewing and finalizing our trade policy review with support from TIMEA, is looking at critical, and we're doing both review of our trade policy and industrial policy. We need to go beyond, and today's discussion, of course, has focused on agricultural commodities and value-add agricultural commodities, but as the Ministry of Trade, we look at the broader export sector. And manufactured value-added products beyond agriculture also needs to increase. And we've started to see investments in sectors such as automobiles, pharmaceuticals, electronics, and so we need to start making more inroads within those sectors. We need to start producing more complex products, more products that can establish and network an ecosystem around these anchor industries of auto, pharma, electronics, agro-processing, but that are higher valued products. When we're talking about mineral beneficiation, for instance, going beyond refinery and into precursor minerals and starting to establish industries around those sectors. So those are the value chains we need to start looking at. Where does Rwanda situate itself within these higher value chains? And I think that's a process that we're starting now, identifying what those sectors are. Agriculture, of course, is an important one, but beyond that, what are the other sectors? Services is also another value chain sector that's really important, especially transport and tourism services. So we need to also look at how do we develop the value chain around these services sectors. And I think that is an ongoing process. And then, of course, making sure that it aligns with NST1. The target is to reach 17% export growth annually, which we're doing relatively well on. We're usually around 16.5% over the last few years. So how do we also ensure that we can really ramp up our exports as a percentage of GDP over the next decade and really into Vision 2050 and the midterm targets as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. Allow me to thank Mr. Antoine Kajangwe, the Director General of Trade and Investment at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, for being part of this conversation. Allow me to also thank Mr. Joseph Mutabazi, the Director of Trade and Business Development at the Rwanda Private Sector Federation, also known as PSF. Mr. Claude Bizimana, to my left, the CEO of the National Agriculture Export Development Board. Thank you. And the man who dodged our question, Dr. Pierre Clever Rutaisire, the Principal of the College of Business and Economics at the University of Rwanda. Thank you for making the time, sir. Before I hand over to Ambassador Kazin, and I'm leaving you with a challenge as AKADEMIYA2063. The challenge, we've had a conversation around agriculture today. We still, as Africa, very dependent on the Global Commodities Index. So, as AKADEMIYA2063, what role can you play in ensuring that Africa has its own commodities index? Thank you. Thank you for the time.
Well, thank you very much for a very dynamic panel, Mr. Quizera, and for putting that challenge to AKADEMIYA2063. And I'm going to hand that challenge right off to our chairperson, to Dr. Badian, to respond to that. That's very provocative but very important question. So why don't we start, even before we go into the closing, with a response to the question that was posed.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for all the panelists who joined us here today. On that question, maybe not an index, but what we are trying to do, and I was just going to touch on that, the research that you saw here today and similar research we're doing in AKADEMIYA2063 will lead to what we call the Africa Trade Outlook Portal, which will be launched at the end of this year. You'll be able to track how global commodity markets are changing and what it means for African economies and African countries. You will see the dynamics on regional markets and what it means for us. You will have a web version of the report that Claude referred to and assigned to IFPRI, the Africa Agriculture Trade Monitor, which is a flagship of AKADEMIYA2063 and actually produced jointly with IFPRI. And you will have, if we can get the IP rights from Comtrade, a more consistent, high quality trade data set among African countries. We use the original data set, we improve it to get more consistency on that through algorithm we developed in-house. So if you have that, then we can post that. It will not be perhaps the kind of index you want, but you have enough information in real time available digitally for us to monitor trade and also do a little bit of foresight. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. And in having led the WFP in Rome, as you were speaking, what came to mind was the term piano, step by step. We will build the foundation of data that is necessary to create the type of tool that was suggested. The reality is that what we've heard here today is the challenges that are affecting the trade opportunities that are so clearly identifiable across not just the region, but of course the entire continent. continent. But the gap filling that AKADEMIYA2063 is providing through the publication of data that has not been successfully available in the past will make a tremendous leap forward towards addressing many of those challenges that we've been discussing here today and moving us into a position where we can capture the opportunities that have been so clearly outlined and defined. If that's in and of itself, that ability to move forward was a significant outcome for me in listening to the conversation today. But before I go into that closing, I think it is very, very important, Usman, that we hear directly from you on your takeaways from today's conversation and your closing remarks for our guest here this afternoon.
Thank you very much again, Etherin, for being here with us. Let me say, in the direction of PAFO, Madam CEO, we signed an MOU with PAFO. We have been in 2 sessions with President Coley Young and your team to make data and analytics available to you. The first product we're working with them is a digital platform that have the information of all your members and all the parameters that are available and are relevant to them. And they have a couple of concept notes for research and data that we're working together with them. So we have a very strong bond with PAFO, and we're very proud of that. So, and I just wanted to mention that. I would also like to say thank you to those who joined us here, starting with, of course, our panelists, all of you. I also would like to say thank you to DG NISA, to AFDB representative here, my sister Aisha, and of course my cousin in real term, the UN coordinator. It doesn't happen often that 2 cousins serve in the same country, so it's good to have him here, so thank you for that. I'd also would like to thank you to maybe Ismail, if you would like to stand up. He's the director of the department that has done this work at AKADEMIYA2063. So thank you. I also would like to thank you to the Kigali team here. We have our senior director, Joseph Nyirimana, and Lai is here, and others who made this work and work well. Thank you very much to all of you. I was going to say something on the SME, DJ Antoine. Our work on looking at SME in the past has shown that we have a major entry, real movement in entering the SME, but we get stuck very quickly, even before exporting. And it is the difficulty to innovate in terms of products and processes. It is the difficulty to acquire the management skills. It is the difficulty to acquire finance. But the first 2 are much more of a bigger constraint. So you end up having a population of a large number of SMEs producing the same low quality product, trying to sell to the same consumer. So easily the profit line just nosedives, right? So how you as a government can bring in the capacity to innovate, to maturate, even before you consolidate, to have among those many SMEs, some that will maturate and emerge, become middle class, and then probably top class players. That is the biggest challenge I think that we have. But I think a focused effort on internalizing the externalities of innovating, the returns to that, could allow you probably to work that line and work it successfully. That is really an important one. So again, thank you to you. I'll let you go with the challenge. You have seen our logo. You see the African mask there. Try to figure out the word academia when you go home and you look at the mask. The 2 A's are easily visible, but the entire term academia is in that mask. So just to have you do something that's quite interesting as you go. So thank you again. We are here in Kigali. We want to be a good neighbor. We would like to work with all of you, and we'll do what we can to make sure that we're worthy of the hospitality of this country. Murakoze Chane, all of you. Thank you very much.
Usman, thank you very much for those closing remarks and for thanking our participants for their engagement here today, because this has not just been presentation, it's very much been about engagement of the audience as well. I learned as much from many members of the audience as I did from the panelists who joined us here for this conversation. having been a part of this institute from its very genesis as a board member. And I know that this workshop is an event that has been long planned inside the organization, and unfortunately, because of COVID, we could not convene in person, and as opposed to again doing yet another workshop on Zoom, the organization chose to wait until we could gather in person to enrich one another in ways that Zoom just doesn't allow for. And I think it was well worth the wait, don't you? As we close today, let me just, to the CEO of the Pan-African Farmers Organization, say that I embrace your comments wholeheartedly, and I often use them in my own remarks when talking about agriculture and food security, and reminding the leaders across the global community that farmers must always be at the center of the work that we perform, because without farmers there is no work to be performed, because that is where the, as they say, the action is actually occurring. And so it was a good reminder for us here today as we develop materials and to innovate and to scale and to provide for additional economic opportunity, that we always consider how those materials are communicated to and can be used by farmers to make them more productive, which means that we're not talking to each other. We must ensure that we're talking to those who need the services that we perform. So we heard you. Thank you. On the issue of nutrition, as the former executive director of the World Food Program, let me just tell you that when we too often we embrace the concept that we produce enough food to feed the world. Yet 2.5 billion people can't afford a diverse diet. And so we produce enough calories, but we do not produce enough diverse foods to support the nutrition of the global population, particularly here on the continent. And so the opportunity for us to ensure that as we scale, as we develop new products, new facilities, that we're also considering issues related to nutrition is also quite top of mind. So thank you for that reminder to all of us. We have as a community focused on issues of agriculture and food security, have overcome the challenges of COVID and seen the fragility in our food system. We already knew that we had many, many challenges in our food system, but the fragility of the food system was truly illuminated during COVID. And even as we, as many say, have now overcome COVID, we are still feeling the impacts of the COVID epidemic on the food system, in particular with higher food prices. And now you take that challenge and we are compounding that with the potential for a high food price hunger crisis that is looming in front of us, with the overhang of the economic issues on many of the countries here across the continent from COVID, compounding what could become a humanitarian challenge. What I and others have sought to do in the past few weeks is to proactively address what the indicators of the potential for a high food price crisis by saying, why not get the tools like fertilizer, like access to the seeds for substitution of commodities that may provide an opportunity for for a significant economic return to farmers and to traders as they substitute for products that may not be on the market or may not be affordable on the market, as opposed to waiting until the harvest does not produce enough of the products that are necessary. And we are addressing this from a humanitarian standpoint as opposed to an economic opportunity and development standpoint on the front end. We'll see how successful we are over the coming weeks, and we'll know how successful we are truly in 6 months when we are measuring and what is the availability in the marketplace, and then more importantly, the affordability of what is available in the marketplace for consumers. As we see the challenges in the global market and how they affect local food availability and food affordability across not just Rwanda and East Africa, but arguably across not just the continent, but the entire globe. So that is the backdrop from which this conversation is being held today. And what that backdrop highlights is the importance of trade and the opportunity that was so clearly articulated from the Usman's opening remarks to Patient's comments, as well as the discussion of the panelists, of what we must do in order to achieve the what is possible. As we move towards 2063, and the commitments that all of the governments of the continent have signed up to, and while we simultaneously embrace the reality of what the climate crisis will wreak upon the agricultural production of the continent. All of those issues demand that the barriers, the issues that have been identified here today, that we address them successfully to achieve not just the opportunities, not just to overcome the challenges, but to achieve the opportunities that overcoming those challenges, overcoming those issues would provide. So I am delighted that you all have allowed this American woman from the west side of the city of Chicago to be part of this journey. And I will continue to support AKADEMIYA2063 and others in the audience as we together achieve the what is possible. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to turn back over to our leader.
While Lai is coming, we have a catalog of all publications and all our data portals. Please take it with you. That's our contribution to the climate, that we don't carry books around. We carry the catalog. You have a QR codes. You point and you can get any of this publication and can navigate any of the portal. So thank you. Everything we have is here.
Again, thank you all for coming today. Thank you for your participation. Over to you, Laia.
Thank you, Ambassador Etherine Cousin. Can we please have another round of applause for our session chair, our executive chairperson, and all our speakers and panelists, please? Thank you so much. Please, can you regain your seats? Thank you for staying until the end. We're so sorry that we went overboard with time, but good news is it's time for lunch. So when you step outside, you'll receive a ticket from one of our ushers, and you can take the ticket to the restaurant. I would now like to invite all the speakers on the stage for a group picture. Just a few seconds for the seats to be cleared. Please don't forget to pick up a ticket from an usher before you head to the restaurant. I would like to invite on stage all our panelists, all our speakers, our executive chairperson, the chair of the session. Please join us on stage.